Hey there, welcome back to another cozy Minecraft session where we build, while I share some of the internet's most jaw-dropping stories. As always, feel free to grab a snack and get comfortable while we dive into today's tales. I should warn you that we're about to witness some wild emotional roller coasters, from a fertility doctor who crossed unimaginable ethical lines to family members harboring decades-old secrets. These stories showcase how quickly ordinary relationships can spiral into complex webs of deception. As always, thank you so much to everyone who's been watching and sharing your feedback in the comments. I truly appreciate you taking the time to share your thoughts and let me know you're enjoying this kind of content. I read every single comment, and I'll keep doing my best to help you unwind as we dive into some of the most outrageous Reddit drama out there. Let's begin with a couple who trusted their doctor with their most vulnerable dream, starting a family, only to discover a nightmare they never could have imagined. My husband Tom and I tried for nearly 4 years to have a baby. We tracked ovulation, changed our diets, tried every folk remedy you can imagine, but nothing worked. After all the negative pregnancy tests, we finally decided to see a fertility specialist. That's when we met Dr. Mendez. From our very first appointment, Dr. Mendez seemed different from the other doctors we'd consulted. He was warm, empathetic, and spoke with such confidence about our chances. His clinic was exclusive and expensive, but his success rates were impressive. I have a special touch with difficult cases, he told us during our consultation, something I'd later remember with a chill down my spine. We went through 3 rounds of IVF. The first 2 failed, but Dr. Mendez remained optimistic. Your case is challenging, he'd say, but I've never met a fertility challenge I couldn't overcome. For the 3rd round, he suggested some experimental techniques that weren't on the standard forms. We were desperate at that point, emotionally drained and financially stretched. When he explained these techniques might improve our odds substantially, we trusted him completely. When that 3rd round worked and I finally got pregnant, we were ecstatic. 9 months later, our beautiful daughter Emma was born. She had my eyes, we all agreed, though her hair was darker than either of ours. But babies change as they grow, right? We were just so grateful to have her. For 8 years, our life was everything we dreamed of. Emma was bright, healthy, and curious about everything. She excelled in science, which made Tom especially proud since he's an engineer. Our fertility struggle seemed like a distant memory, something we'd overcome together. Then came Emma's school science fair. Her class was doing a project on genetics, and they were doing simple DNA tests to trace basic inherited traits. Nothing medical or comprehensive, just fun educational kits about eye color, attached earlobes, stuff like that. When Emma brought home her results, she was confused. According to the test, she couldn't have inherited certain traits from both Tom and me. It's just a classroom kit, Tom assured her. These things aren't very accurate. But privately, we were unsettled enough to buy a more comprehensive home DNA kit. We told Emma it was just to show her how different tests can give different results. When those results came back, our world collapsed. Tom wasn't Emma's biological father. My mind raced to dark places. Had there been a mix-up at the clinic? Was there some contamination of the sample? I knew without a doubt I hadn't been with anyone else. I called the clinic immediately, but Dr. Mendez was unavailable. His receptionist promised he'd call back, but days passed with no word. Then one evening, Dr. Mendez showed up at our house unannounced. He said he'd received our concerned message and thought this was something best discussed in person. There was something different about him now, a strange intensity in his eyes that made me uncomfortable. I've been expecting this conversation for some time, he said once we were seated in our living room. It was only a matter of time before one of the families discovered the truth. Tom asked what he meant by families, and that's when Dr. Mendez revealed the horrifying truth. He hadn't just made a mistake with our embryo. He had deliberately used his own sperm in our procedure, and not just ours, dozens of others. You have to understand, he said as if explaining something perfectly reasonable. Most donor sperm is subpar. I have an IQ of 165, perfect health and athletic ability. I gave your family a superior genetic gift. I still remember the way he smiled when he said that, like he expected us to be grateful, like we should thank him. Tom lunged across the coffee table, and I thought he might actually kill Dr. Mendez. I pulled him back, not to protect Mendez, but to protect Tom from doing something he'd regret. Get out of our house, I screamed. We're going to report you to the medical board, to the police, to everyone. But that wasn't even the worst part. As Dr. Mendez was leaving, he turned back with this smug expression and said, "By the way, I've already filed for parental rights. Emma is biologically my daughter, and I have a right to be in her life. My lawyer will be in touch." The audacity of this man was actually breathtaking. He had violated us in the most profound way possible, and now he was threatening to take our daughter. The following weeks were a nightmare. We hired a lawyer immediately who advised us to get a court-ordered DNA test to confirm what we already knew. We also filed complaints with the medical licensing board and the police, but the wheels of bureaucracy turned slowly, and meanwhile we received formal paperwork from Mendez's lawyer asserting his parental rights. Our lawyer suggested we search for other families who might have been victims. We started with a post in a private local parenting group, being careful not to identify ourselves. Did you conceive with Dr. Mendez's help? Important medical information to share. Within 24 hours, we had responses from 4 other families. Within a week, the number had grown to 12. By the end of the month, we had identified 27 families who suspected or had confirmed that Mendez had used his own sperm in their fertility treatments. We formed a support group and began comparing notes. The pattern was clear. Mendez had targeted couples where the male partner had significant fertility issues. In each case, he had suggested experimental techniques not covered in the standard paperwork. And in each case, the children shared certain physical traits we now recognized as Mendez's. One mother in our group was a journalist who helped us take the story public. Another was married to a detective who helped navigate the criminal complaint process. Together, we built an ironclad case. The class action lawsuit we filed revealed that Mendez had been doing this for over 2 decades. Some of his biological children were now adults. Many of these families had multiple children conceived with his help, meaning he had half-siblings scattered throughout our community who had never known they were related. Then came the breaking point. During discovery for our lawsuit, we found something that turned our stomachs. Mendez had kept detailed records of all his children. He had secretly attended school events, taken photos from a distance, and in some cases even arranged to be present at medical appointments by claiming to be consulting with their pediatricians. He had been stalking our children for years. The medical board revoked his license immediately after our evidence was presented. The criminal case moved more slowly, but eventually he was charged with multiple counts of fraud and reproductive assault, a charge that had rarely been used in our state before this case. As for his parental rights claim, the judge threw it out with a scathing opinion that made headlines. The court finds the plaintiff's claim represents a grotesque abuse of medical authority and a profound misunderstanding of both legal and ethical parental rights. The plaintiff's actions were a calculated violation of the sacred trust between doctor and patient, and this court will not reward such violations by granting the relief requested. Mendez eventually pled guilty to reduced charges to avoid a trial. He was sentenced to 7 years in prison and will never practice medicine again. The civil case resulted in a substantial settlement, though no amount of money could undo the violation we experienced. As for Emma, we decided to tell her the truth when she was 12, in an age-appropriate way with the help of a therapist. She was confused and angry at first, but over time she's come to understand that family is about love, not genetics. Tom is her real father in every way that matters. We still struggle with the fallout. Sometimes I'll catch a gesture or expression of Emma's that reminds me of him, and it takes my breath away. But then she'll laugh like Tom or furrow her brow in concentration, exactly the way he does, and I remember that nurture is stronger than nature. I never thought I'd be the person hiring an expensive divorce attorney. Marriage was supposed to be forever, but after 15 years with Rachel, things had deteriorated beyond repair. The constant fighting, the growing distance, and finally the discovery of her affair with her gym trainer was the last straw. I wanted a clean break, fair division of assets, and most importantly, joint custody of our 2 children, Ellie and Max. So I hired Wilson & Associates, supposedly the best divorce firm in our city. My attorney, James Wilson himself, had a reputation for being fair but tough. His retainer fee was eye-watering, but people said he was worth every penny. His paralegal, Marissa, had been with the firm for 12 years and handled all his high-profile divorce cases. She was polished, efficient, and seemed genuinely sympathetic to my situation. We'll make sure you get a fair shake, she assured me during our first meeting. I've seen too many good parents lose access to their children over petty divorce politics. I felt like I was in good hands. James and Marissa worked as a seamless team. She prepared all the documents, organized our evidence, and often sat in on strategy meetings, taking meticulous notes while James explained our approach. I found myself opening up to her, sharing details about Rachel's vindictiveness and my fears about losing my kids. The first sign that something was off came about 2 months into the proceedings. We had developed a strategy to request financial records that would reveal Rachel had been siphoning money from our joint accounts to fund her affair, including a weekend getaway that she'd claimed was a work conference. This was information I'd only discussed with James and Marissa, no one else. But the day before we were set to file the request, Rachel's attorney submitted a motion to seal certain financial records, specifically mentioning the accounts we were targeting. It was like they had read our minds. James was puzzled but not alarmed. Coincidences happen in legal proceedings, he said. Maybe your ex anticipated this move. Then it happened again. We prepared to call a witness, Rachel's former assistant who had knowledge of the affair, only to discover that Rachel's team had already deposed her and gotten a signed statement contradicting what she had told us privately. Again, this was something we had only discussed in James's office. This is getting strange, James admitted, but let's focus on our next steps. The pattern continued. Every strategy we devised, every surprise witness we identified, every piece of evidence we planned to introduce. Somehow, Rachel's team was always one step ahead. It was maddening. The real gut punch came during the custody hearing. James and I had prepared extensive documentation of my involvement in the children's lives, coaching Max's baseball team, attending all of Ellie's dance recitals, handling doctor appointments and school meetings. We had character witnesses lined up, including the children's teachers, but Rachel's team came armed with out-of-context text messages, edited photos, and statements from neighbors that painted me as an absent, disinterested father. They even had a recording of me losing my temper during a fight with Rachel, something I wasn't proud of, but which had happened exactly once in our marriage. James was visibly shocked by some of the evidence. They shouldn't have access to these texts, he whispered to me during a recess. These were on your personal phone. The judge was clearly influenced by Rachel's evidence. Despite James's best efforts, I lost primary custody of my children and was granted only limited visitation rights, every other weekend and 1 evening per week. I was also ordered to pay substantial alimony and child support, leaving me financially crippled. I was devastated. How could this happen when I'd hired the best? How did they know every move we were going to make? That's when I decided to hire a private investigator. If something fishy was happening, I needed to know. It was a desperate move, especially since I was already struggling financially after the divorce settlement, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I had been set up. The PI, a retired police detective named Frank, took the case with some skepticism. Usually when clients lose court cases, they want to blame everyone but themselves, he told me bluntly. But I'll look into it. For 3 weeks, I heard nothing from Frank. Then he called me late one evening. We need to meet, not at your place or my office. Somewhere public, but where we can talk privately. We met at a 24-hour diner on the edge of town. Frank slid a manila envelope across the table. You were right, he said grimly. There was a leak, but it's worse than you thought. Inside the envelope were photos that made my blood run cold. Marissa, my lawyer's trusted paralegal, meeting with Rachel's attorney, David Cohen, at a restaurant. They weren't discussing business. They were holding hands across the table, kissing. In one photo, she was passing him what looked like a USB drive. They've been dating for about 8 months, Frank explained. Started right around when you filed for divorce. I managed to get access to her phone records. Hundreds of texts and calls between them, always after hours. And here's where it gets absurd. Frank had more photos. Marissa in James's office after hours, photographing documents from my file with her phone. Marissa with a small recording device, retrieving it from underneath the conference room table where we had our strategy sessions. Marissa meeting Cohen in a parking garage, handing over what appeared to be copies of documents. She recorded every conversation you had with your attorney, Frank said. Every strategy session, every disclosure, every weakness James identified in your case. She gave everything to Cohen. I felt physically ill. All those months of fighting, all that money spent, all the heartache and loss. it was all because someone I trusted had betrayed me in the most profound way. I took the evidence to James immediately. He was stunned into silence as he reviewed the photos and recordings Frank had gathered. Marissa had been with him for 12 years. She'd been a bridesmaid at his daughter's wedding. She had keys to his house to water plants when he was on vacation. "I don't understand," he kept saying. "Why would she do this?" Further investigation revealed that Cohen had promised Marissa a position at his firm with double her current salary once my case was finished. They had been planning to move in together. The betrayal was calculated and deliberate. James was a man transformed. The calm, measured attorney became a force of nature. He immediately fired Marissa and filed complaints with the State Bar Association against both her and Cohen for ethics violations. He also filed a motion for a new trial based on legal malpractice and fraud upon the court. "I've never been so angry in my professional life," he told me. "They've made a mockery of the entire legal system. I won't rest until this is made right." The next few months were a whirlwind of legal proceedings. Marissa and Cohen both denied everything at first, but the evidence was overwhelming. Eventually, Cohen's firm cut ties with him to distance themselves from the scandal. Both Marissa and Cohen were disbarred after disciplinary hearings. As for my case, the family court judge was furious when presented with evidence of how the previous proceedings had been compromised. He vacated the original judgment and ordered a new trial. This time, with no inside information being leaked, Rachel's case fell apart. The judge awarded us joint custody, with the children spending equal time at both homes. The financial settlement was adjusted to be more equitable. The most satisfying moment was when the judge directly addressed Rachel during the final hearing. "The court takes a very dim view of parties who attempt to manipulate justice through unethical means. You may not have known about your attorney's misconduct, but you benefited from ill-gotten information, and your credibility with this court is severely damaged. It took 2 years of hell to get justice, but in the end, it was worth it to have my children back in my life as a full-time parent. James and I have become friends, bonded by the betrayal we both experienced. He's rebuilt his firm with a focus on ethical practice and rigorous confidentiality measures. As for Marissa and Cohen, I heard they broke up shortly after being disbarred. Last I heard, she was working as a receptionist at a dental office, and he had moved to another state. Sometimes the universe delivers its own kind of justice. Think that's bad? Imagine discovering your brother's new bride has been hiding a deadly secret for 20 years. I was 22 years old when it happened. Young, stupid, and coming home from a party where I'd had way too much to drink. It was raining hard that night, one of those summer storms where the water comes down in sheets and the windshield wipers can barely keep up. I remember squinting through the blur, trying to focus on the road ahead. I was on a back road, a shortcut I always took to avoid the main streets where cops might be patrolling. The road was dark, no streetlights, just my headlights cutting through the rain. I was going too fast, I know that now. I was fumbling with the radio when it happened. A figure appeared in my headlights. I had maybe half a second to react. I jerked the wheel, but it was too late. I felt the impact, heard a scream cut short, and then saw a body tumbling into the ditch beside the road. I slammed on the brakes and sat there, gripping the steering wheel, my heart pounding in my chest. I should have gotten out. I should have checked if they were alive, called for help. That's what a decent human being would have done. But I was drunk, scared, and selfish. I put the car in reverse, turned around, and drove away. The whole thing probably lasted less than a minute, but it's played on a loop in my mind for 20 years. I watched the local news obsessively for the next few weeks. They reported on a hit and run. The victim was a 19-year-old woman walking home from her late shift at the diner. She had survived but suffered severe injuries, including a shattered hip and internal bleeding. They described my car, a blue Honda Civic with likely front-end damage, but there were no witnesses, no security cameras on that stretch of road. The case eventually went cold. I sold that car as soon as I could, moved to a different part of town, and tried to forget. I never told anyone, not my friends, not my parents, not even my brother Jake, who I was closest to. I just buried it deep and built a life on top of it. Fast forward 20 years. I was doing well, good job in finance, nice house in the suburbs, respected in the community. The hit and run had become a shameful secret locked away in a corner of my mind that I rarely visited. Jake had been through a rough divorce a few years earlier and had finally started dating again. He called me one Sunday, sounding happier than he had in years. "I've met someone," he said. "She's amazing. Her name is Vanessa. I think this is it, bro. I think she's the one." I was thrilled for him. Jake deserved happiness after everything he'd been through with his ex. When he invited me to dinner to meet Vanessa, I immediately said yes. They came to my house the following weekend. I opened the door to greet them, and there she was, Vanessa, mid-40s, attractive, with a warm smile that lit up her face. But there was something about her that nagged at me, a strange sense of familiarity that I couldn't place. Had we met before? I didn't think so. I would have remembered her. She was charming throughout dinner, asking thoughtful questions about my work, my hobbies, my opinions on everything from politics to music. Jake beamed beside her, clearly smitten. I liked her immediately, although that odd feeling of recognition lingered. 6 months later, Jake proposed, and she said yes. I was going to be the best man. During the wedding preparations, we spent more time together, planning the bachelor party, helping with venue selections, all the usual stuff. Vanessa and I developed what I thought was a genuine friendship. One afternoon, we were at Jake's place, going over seating arrangements for the reception. Jake had run out to pick up lunch, leaving Vanessa and me alone. "This chair is great for my hip," she said, settling into Jake's recliner. "Still gets stiff when I sit too long." "Old injury?" I asked casually. "You could say that. Got hit by a car when I was 19. Shattered my hip completely. Have a titanium replacement now." My blood ran cold. I tried to keep my expression neutral, but I must have failed because she looked at me curiously. "You okay? You went pale there for a second." "Fine," I managed. "Just, that sounds awful. Where did it happen?" She named the exact road where I'd hit someone 20 years ago. The exact spot, the exact time of year. "Driver never stopped," she continued, her eyes never leaving my face. "Left me in a ditch in the pouring rain. If a couple hadn't driven by about 20 minutes later, I might have bled out." I excused myself to the bathroom, locked the door, and splashed cold water on my face, trying not to vomit. It couldn't be. The mathematical probability of my brother randomly meeting and falling in love with the woman I'd nearly killed 2 decades ago had to be infinitesimal. It had to be a coincidence. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. For the next few weeks, I tried to act normal while my mind raced with questions and fears. Was it really her? Did she know it was me? Was it possible that after all these years, my crime had finally caught up with me? Then came the rehearsal dinner the night before the wedding. Everything seemed perfect. Good food, touching speeches, laughter and joy all around. Jake looked happier than I'd ever seen him. I started to think maybe I was being paranoid, that it really was just a bizarre coincidence. After dinner, while people were mingling, Vanessa came up beside me at the bar. "Can we step outside for a moment? I need some air," she said. We walked out onto the restaurant's patio, empty now as the evening had turned chilly. She led me to the far corner, away from the doors and windows, where no one could see or hear us, and that's when everything unraveled. "Blue Honda Civic," she said quietly. "License plate started with TRE, front right headlight smashed, May 17th, 2003, approximately 1:15 a.m. My legs nearly gave out. Those details had never been in the news. Don't, she cut me off, her voice suddenly hard. "I recognized you the moment we met. I've been looking at your photo for years." The police report had a partial plate from debris left at the scene. It took years of digging, but I eventually found car registration records matching the description. There were 17 possibilities. I researched each owner. When I found your name and saw you were still in the area, I knew I was close. "Then meeting Jake," I whispered, "was no coincidence," she confirmed. "I orchestrated our chance meeting at his gym. I researched him too, learned his routines, his interests, what kind of women he dated. I made myself into exactly what he was looking for." I felt like I was going to be sick. "You've been using my brother to get to me? You don't love him?" And here's where it gets absurd. Her expression softened and she looked almost apologetic. "That's the complicated part. I didn't expect to actually fall for him. Jake is a good man, kind, honest, everything you're not. I started this as revenge, but somewhere along the way," she shook her head, "my feelings for him are real now, which is why this is so difficult." "What do you want?" I asked, though I already knew. "Justice," she said simply. "You left me to die. Do you know what happened to me after that night? 6 surgeries. 2 years of physical therapy just to walk normally again. Pain every single day for the rest of my life. Dreams of being a dancer, gone. And not once did you come forward. Not once did you take responsibility. I was young, I was scared. And I was 19 and bleeding in a ditch," she hissed, her composure cracking for the first time. She took a deep breath, regaining control. "Here's what's going to happen. After the wedding, you're going to tell Jake and your family what you did. All of it. Then you're going to turn yourself into the police. The statute of limitations doesn't apply to felony hit and run in this state. I've checked very thoroughly." Her eyes were hard as flint. "If you don't do this, I'll tell them myself, and I'll make sure everyone knows, your friends, your colleagues, everyone in your carefully built life. And what about Jake? This will destroy him." "Yes," she admitted, her voice softening again. "It will hurt him deeply, but better he knows the truth about his brother before we start our life together." What happened next? Nobody saw it coming. She reached into her purse and pulled out a voice recorder. "I've just recorded this entire conversation. Insurance in case you try anything stupid." She tucked it away again. "I do love your brother. I want our marriage to be built on honesty, which means clearing the air about this. You have until Sunday night after we return from our honeymoon. If you haven't confessed by then, I will." She walked back inside, rejoining the party with a bright smile as if nothing had happened. I stood frozen on the patio, watching through the window as she slipped her arm through Jake's, laughing at something someone said. I didn't sleep that night, or the next. I went through the wedding in a daze, standing beside my brother as his best man, while the woman who held my fate in her hands became my sister-in-law. The irony was almost too much to bear. After they left for their honeymoon, 2 weeks in Bali, I had time to think. I considered running, starting over somewhere else. I thought about trying to discredit her somehow. I even had one dark moment where I contemplated more desperate measures. But in the end, I knew she was right. 20 years of freedom while she suffered daily pain. I had gotten away with it long enough, and Jake deserved the truth, however painful. They came back tanned and happy. I invited them and my parents over for dinner. After the meal, I asked them all to sit down because I had something important to tell them. I confessed everything. The accident, fleeing the scene, the years of silence. I told them how Vanessa had recognized me, how she'd demanded justice. I watched their faces transform. Shock, disbelief, and then, worst of all, disappointment and disgust. Jake stormed out. My mother cried. My father couldn't even look at me. Vanessa, surprisingly, was the only one who showed me any compassion, placing a hand on my arm before following Jake out. The next morning, I turned myself into the police. Because of the severity of Vanessa's injuries, I was charged with felony hit and run. My previously clean record and voluntary confession worked in my favor. I received a suspended sentence, 5 years probation, community service, and a substantial restitution payment to Vanessa, which she immediately donated to a charity for accident victims. Jake eventually started speaking to me again, though things will never be the same between us. He chose to stay with Vanessa, understanding her actions even if he couldn't fully forgive the deception. My parents are trying, but I see the disappointment in their eyes whenever we're together. As for Vanessa and me, we've developed a strange, tentative relationship. Not friendship exactly, but something like respect. She got her justice, and I finally faced mine. The guilt I carried for 20 years is lifted, even as I deal with the consequences of my actions. Sometimes I look at them together and wonder at the twisted path that brought us all to this point. Was it fate, divine justice, or just the relentless determination of a woman who refused to remain a victim? Whatever it was, I can finally look at myself in the mirror each morning. And somehow, that makes everything worth it. If you've made it this far into the chaos, you're clearly as addicted to Reddit drama as I am. Hit that subscribe button right now and drop a comment telling me which story is making your jaw drop the hardest. Okay, so back to Vanessa's revenge plan. Just when you thought family betrayal couldn't get worse, wait until you hear about the wedding planner who turned a dream day into the perfect revenge. I never thought I'd be the bride who got left at the altar. That's something you see in movies, not something that happens to real people. Certainly not to someone like me who plans everything down to the last detail. But here I am, telling the story of how my perfect wedding turned into the perfect disaster. James and I had been together for 2 years when he proposed. We met at a charity gala. He was charming, successful, and seemed genuinely interested in everything I had to say. Within 6 months, we were living together, and by our second anniversary, he was down on one knee with a diamond that made my friends gasp. I wanted our wedding to be perfect, and with my job in corporate finance, I didn't have time to plan it myself. Hire a professional, my mother advised, someone who can handle all the details while you focus on work. After researching dozens of wedding planners, I found Alison Brooks of Forever Moments. Her portfolio was stunning: elegant ceremonies, flawless receptions, attention to every detail. Her reviews were glowing. Alison saved our day. Couldn't have done it without her. Worth every penny. She was in high demand, but somehow had an opening exactly in our time frame due to a cancellation. When we first met Alison at her chic downtown office, I was immediately impressed. She was polished, professional, and seemed to anticipate my thoughts before I expressed them. Her presentation was meticulous: mood boards, vendor recommendations, budget breakdowns. James was less enthusiastic, but he rarely got excited about these kinds of things. "She seems a bit intense," he said afterward. "She's thorough," I corrected him. "Exactly what we need." Alison and I clicked immediately. She understood my vision perfectly: a sophisticated vineyard wedding with 150 guests, gourmet farm-to-table menu, and a string quartet for the ceremony. We secured my dream venue, a stunning winery overlooking the valley, and began assembling the perfect team of vendors. For the first 2 months, everything progressed smoothly. Deposits were paid, contracts were signed, fittings were scheduled. Alison handled everything with calm efficiency. She even helped me find the perfect dress when I was torn between two styles. "This one frames your shoulders beautifully," she said, adjusting the neckline. "James won't be able to take his eyes off you." I noticed she rarely addressed James directly during our meetings, but I attributed it to her recognizing that I was the decision maker. James seemed content to let me handle the details, attending meetings when required but offering little input. "Whatever makes you happy, babe," was his standard response. The first sign of trouble came 5 months before the wedding. Our photographer, a sought-after professional whose work I adored, suddenly emailed to say she could no longer shoot our wedding due to a scheduling conflict. I was disappointed but understood these things happen. Alison quickly found a replacement who seemed equally talented. Then our florist dropped out. The replacement Alison found was more expensive but available. Next, the caterer called, apologizing profusely but explaining they had double booked our date. Again, Alison swooped in with an alternative, though the menu wasn't quite what we had planned and the cost was significantly higher. "These things happen in waves sometimes," Alison assured me. "But don't worry, I've got it all under control." When our dream venue called 3 months before the wedding to inform us they had accidentally double booked our date with another wedding, I finally broke down. How could so many things go wrong? The replacement venue Alison suggested was nice, but lacked the view and charm that had made me fall in love with the original. "It's just a venue," James said, trying to comfort me. "The important thing is that we're getting married." His calm reaction struck me as odd. Shouldn't he be as upset as I was? But I was too stressed to dwell on it. As the wedding date approached, my anxiety increased. The costs were spiraling well beyond our original budget. Deposits we had paid to vendors who cancelled weren't being refunded as quickly as they should have been. Alison assured me she was handling it, but when I checked our wedding account, several large sums were missing with no clear explanation. "I'll get you a full accounting," Alison promised when I confronted her. "There's just been so much juggling with all the changes." Then came the breaking point. 3 days before our wedding, I received an anonymous email. "Thought you should see this before you say I do." The message contained a link to a folder of photos. James and Alison together at a restaurant, holding hands, James and Alison entering a hotel. The timestamps showed these were taken during the past 2 months, on days when James had told me he was working late or meeting clients. My world collapsed. I called my maid of honor, Stephanie, who came over immediately. Together we looked through the photos again, trying to make sense of them. Was this some kind of sick joke? A misunderstanding? "Call him," Stephanie urged. "Confront him?" James didn't answer his phone. When I checked his location on our shared app, it showed him at an address I didn't recognize. I looked it up, a residential building downtown. Without thinking, I grabbed my keys. You shouldn't go alone, Stephanie warned. I'm not confronting him, I said. I just need to see for myself. We drove to the address, a luxury apartment building. I had a sickening feeling as we approached. The directory in the lobby confirmed my worst fears. A. Brooks, apartment 1107. I pressed the buzzer, my heart pounding. When the door opened, there stood James in sweatpants and a t-shirt, looking shocked to see me. Behind him, I caught a glimpse of Allison. Maya, what are you doing here? He stammered. Apparently finding out who my fiancé really is, I replied, my voice surprisingly steady. How long has this been going on, James? And that's when everything unraveled completely. James tried to deny it at first, but Allison stepped forward with an expression I'd never seen on her face before. Cold satisfaction. Why don't you come in, Maya? She said. It's time you learn the truth. Inside her apartment, the truth hit me like a physical blow. Allison wasn't just some random wedding planner. She was Alexandra Collins, James's college girlfriend, whom he had dated for 3 years before brutally dumping her via text message right before their graduation. He'd never mentioned her to me beyond a passing reference to a serious relationship in college that didn't work out. He didn't recognize me, Alexandra explained, a hint of pride in her voice. I changed my name, lost weight, dyed my hair, even had some subtle cosmetic procedures. I built my wedding planning business from scratch with this moment in mind. You've been planning this for years? I asked, incredulous. At first, yes, I wanted revenge. I wanted to ruin his happiness like he ruined mine. I tracked his relationships through social media, waiting for an engagement. When you announced yours, I made sure my company would appear in all your searches. What happened next? Nobody saw it coming. But then something unexpected happened, she continued. When we started working together, James finally recognized me. Instead of exposing me, he reached out privately. One thing led to another, and she looked at James with what appeared to be genuine affection. It just happened. Maya, James said weakly. We reconnected and all those old feelings came back. I was going to tell you. When? After we were married. My voice rose. After all the wedding money was gone? Allison at least had the decency to look uncomfortable. That wasn't the original plan. What was the original plan? Stephanie demanded. To sabotage your wedding, Allison admitted. The vendors didn't cancel. I cancelled them. The venue wasn't double booked. I made that up. I was going to let everything fall apart around you on your wedding day. And the missing deposits? I asked, suddenly understanding. We were going to use that money to start over somewhere else, James said quietly, after the wedding was called off. The level of calculation left me speechless. They had planned to humiliate me in front of all my friends and family, steal the wedding funds, and disappear together. You people are genuinely unhinged, Stephanie said, staring at them in disbelief. You realize this is fraud, right? That you could go to jail for this? That's exactly what happened. I called off the wedding, obviously. Then I called the police. It turned out Allison had pulled similar schemes with other couples, though never with the groom's cooperation. The money trail was clear. Nearly $30,000 of our wedding funds had been diverted to accounts controlled by Allison and James. They were both charged with fraud and theft. James's parents, mortified by their son's actions, insisted on reimbursing my family for every cent we had lost. I kept the engagement ring. Legally it was mine since he broke the engagement through his deception, and sold it to fund a solo trip to Greece, where I had originally planned our honeymoon. The criminal case ended with both of them accepting plea deals. Allison lost her business and professional reputation. James lost his job when the story hit the local news. Last I heard, they tried to make their relationship work after serving their sentences, but it imploded within months. Apparently, a relationship built on deception and revenge isn't exactly stable. As for me, I'm actually grateful for that anonymous email, which I later discovered came from Allison's assistant, who had grown uncomfortable with the scheme. I dodged a bullet, or rather, a nuclear missile. I'm dating again now, taking things slowly, and doing thorough background checks on anyone I get serious about. And if I ever get engaged again, I'm planning the wedding myself. Speaking of relationship nightmares, you won't believe what this AA sponsor did to betray someone at their most vulnerable. Rock bottom for me wasn't a dramatic, life-threatening event. It was a Tuesday morning when I woke up on my bathroom floor, still in my suit from work the day before, with no memory of the previous night. My phone was full of missed calls from my boss. I'd missed an important client presentation. My wife Jessica was gone. She'd left a note saying she was staying with her sister until you figure out what's more important, me or the bottle. That morning, staring at my bloodshot eyes in the mirror, I finally admitted I couldn't control my drinking anymore. It had been a gradual slide. Social drinking in college became stress relief in my high-pressure job, became needing a drink to feel normal, became not remembering how I got home most nights. I'd promised Jessica I would cut back dozens of times. I'd tried and failed to moderate on my own, but sitting there on my bathroom floor, I finally accepted I needed help. I called in sick, found the nearest AA meeting, and walked in terrified. That's where I met Rick. He spoke at that meeting about his own journey. 15 years sober after losing everything to alcohol. Something in his story resonated with me. After the meeting, he approached me, seemed to recognize the desperation in my eyes, and offered to be my sponsor. First thing, he told me, call your wife. Tell her you're getting help. Then call your boss and be honest. It's the first step toward rebuilding trust. Those early months of sobriety were the hardest thing I've ever done. The physical withdrawal was bad enough, but facing all the emotions I'd been drowning, that was excruciating. Rick was there for me through all of it. He answered my 2 a.m. panic calls. He sat with me through cravings. He walked me through the steps with patience and wisdom. When I confessed my deepest shames in step 5, he listened without judgment. Jessica cautiously moved back in after 3 months of my sobriety. Rick helped me navigate rebuilding our marriage too. He and his wife even had us over for dinner regularly, showing us what a healthy relationship could look like after recovery. Jessica grew to trust and respect Rick almost as much as I did. After a year sober, I started speaking at meetings occasionally. One night, I finally shared my full rock bottom story. It was intensely personal, not just the bathroom floor moment, but everything that led to it. The client I'd been trying to impress who kept ordering rounds, the promotion I'd lost because of my increasing unreliability, the night Jessica found me passed out in our car in the garage and thought I might have tried to hurt myself, the shame I felt looking at the pregnancy test in the trash they'd been trying before my drinking got too bad, and knowing I wasn't fit to be anyone's father. It was cathartic to share that story. Rick hugged me afterward and said, "That's going to help a lot of people someday." I took it as a compliment, not a premonition. By year 2 of my sobriety, things were better than ever. Jessica and I were solid. I'd gotten a new job with better work-life balance. We were even talking about trying for a baby again. Rick had become like family to us. He'd been there through it all. Then I got the assignment that changed everything. My company needed someone to oversee a project in our Singapore office for 6 weeks. It was a huge opportunity, but I was nervous about being away from my support system for so long. "Don't worry," Rick assured me. "There are meetings everywhere, and I'll keep an eye on Jessica. Make sure she's doing okay while you're gone." Those 6 weeks were challenging, but successful. I found an English-speaking AA group in Singapore. I video chatted with Jessica every day at first, though by the final weeks our calls became shorter and less frequent. She seemed distracted, but I attributed it to her busy schedule at work. When I returned home, something felt off. Jessica was distant, almost nervous around me. She said she was just readjusting to having me back, but my instincts told me there was more to it. Still, I trusted her, and I was focused on my sobriety milestone. 2.5 years clean. 3 days after I got back, I received a peculiar email from another AA member. "Thought you might want to see this," it read, with a link to a publishing industry newsletter. The headline made my blood run cold. Recovery Memoir by Richard Linden. Garner's 6-figure advance. Richard Linden was Rick's full name. I knew he'd mentioned wanting to write about his recovery journey someday, but he hadn't told me he was actively working on a book, let alone that he'd sold it. I was hurt not to have heard this directly from him, but tried to be happy for my friend and mentor. Then I read the excerpt included in the newsletter. It was my story, my rock bottom moment. The bathroom floor, the missed presentation, the pregnancy test, all the intimate details I'd shared in that meeting, now presented as Rick's own experience. He'd changed minor details, names, locations, but it was undeniably my story, my pain, my journey. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. I called Rick immediately, but he didn't answer. I drove to his house, but no one was home. Finally, I called his wife, only to learn she'd moved out months ago after discovering he'd relapsed. And here's where it gets absurd. When I confronted Jessica about Rick's betrayal, her face crumpled. Through tears, she confessed they'd been having an affair during my entire time in Singapore. Not only that, they'd been drinking together. My wife and my AA sponsor had relapsed together, carrying on an affair in my own home while I was thousands of miles away, working to secure our financial future. It just happened, she sobbed. He came by to check on me like he promised, and we started talking about how hard it was when you were drinking. He brought wine to toast your success abroad. One glass led to another, and then the betrayal was so complete, so perfectly designed to destroy everything I valued, that I went completely calm. It was like watching a movie of someone else's life falling apart. And the book? I asked quietly. Did you know about that? She nodded miserably. He's been working on it for months. He told me your story was too powerful not to share, that it could help people. He convinced me it wasn't really stealing because he was changing the details. The advance was going to help us. Us, I interrupted. We were talking about leaving together, she admitted, starting fresh somewhere else. I walked out without another word. I checked into a hotel, called my current sponsor. I'd gotten a backup when Rick became too busy several months earlier, and fought the urge to drink with every fiber of my being. The next day, I contacted Rick's publisher with evidence that he had plagiarized my life story. I forwarded emails, meeting attendance records, anything to prove that the story he was selling as his own was actually mine. I wasn't interested in taking over the book deal. I just wanted to stop the fraud. The publisher took my claims seriously, especially when other AA members came forward confirming that Rick had stolen not just my story, but elements from others as well. They cancelled his contract and demanded the return of the advance, most of which he had already spent. Things went from bad to unhinged when Rick showed up at my hotel, drunk and belligerent. He alternated between apologizing profusely and accusing me of ruining his life. You owe me, he slurred. I got you sober. Your story was wasted on you. I could have helped thousands with that book. The man I'd trusted with my life, my deepest vulnerabilities, the person who had guided me through recovery, was now trying to justify stealing my identity and my wife. The irony was so bitter I could taste it. The recovery community rallied around me in ways I never expected. My story, the real one, including Rick's betrayal, spread through local AA groups. Rick was essentially excommunicated from the recovery circles in our city. Multiple sponsees he had abandoned when he relapsed reached out to me with similar stories of betrayal, though none quite as extreme as mine. Jessica and Rick did leave town together, just as they'd planned, though without the cushion of a book advance to support them. Their relationship, built on betrayal and alcohol, was predictably unstable. 6 months later, Jessica called from a rehab facility 2 states away. Rick had become increasingly controlling and abusive as their drinking escalated. She'd finally left him after he became violent during an argument. I know I have no right to ask, she said, her voice small, but I need to make amends. Would you be willing to talk when I finish my program? I told her I'd think about it, and I did. For weeks I wrestled with whether forgiveness was possible, whether it was even healthy. In the end, I agreed to a single conversation after she completed rehab. Not to reconcile, that bridge was thoroughly burned, but because I realized holding on to anger wasn't serving my sobriety. Our eventual meeting was painful but necessary. She took full responsibility, made no excuses, and expected nothing from me. I wished her well in her recovery journey, signed the divorce papers my lawyer had prepared, and walked away feeling lighter than I had in months. Today, I'm 4 years sober. I still attend meetings, though in a different group. I'm careful about what personal details I share publicly now, but I haven't let Rick's betrayal silence me entirely. I eventually did write about my experience, all of it, including the betrayal, in an essay for a recovery magazine. Unlike Rick's fabricated memoir, every word of it was true. The most important lesson I've learned is that recovery isn't just about not drinking. It's about integrity, honesty, and genuine connection. Rick may have stayed physically sober for 15 years, but he never truly recovered. Real sobriety means facing life's challenges without escape hatches, whether those come in bottles or lies. If that betrayal of trust upset you, wait until you see how one mother's caregiver manipulated her way into an entire family fortune. My mother had always been the family rock, sharp as a tack, fiercely independent, and the keeper of our family legacy, a historic home and successful regional business that had been in our family for 4 generations. Even after Dad passed away 5 years ago, she insisted on living alone in the family home, managing the business with my brother's help, and maintaining her active social calendar. The first signs were subtle. Mum started forgetting small things, where she placed her keys, appointments she'd made, names of newer acquaintances. We chalked it up to normal aging. She was 78 after all, but when she called me at 2 a.m., confused about what day it was and why Dad wasn't home, I knew something was wrong. The diagnosis was early-stage dementia, not Alzheimer's, the doctor explained, but a progressive condition that would gradually affect her memory and cognitive function. He recommended we arrange for part-time care while she could still maintain some independence. The key is consistency, the neurologist explained. Regular routines, familiar surroundings, and a stable caregiver she can trust. With proper support, your mother could maintain her current level of function for quite some time. My brother lived across the country, and with my own job and family in another state, moving in with Mom wasn't feasible. So we began interviewing caregivers. The agency sent several candidates, but none seemed quite right. Either Mom didn't connect with them, or they lacked the qualifications we wanted. Then they mentioned they had another caregiver, not part of their regular roster, but someone they occasionally referred privately for special cases. Stefan has exceptional references, the agency coordinator told us. He specializes in memory care and has a background in nursing. He's a bit more expensive, but the families he's worked with have nothing but praise for him. From the moment Stefan walked through the door, Mom lit up. He was in his mid-40s, physically fit with salt and pepper hair that gave him a distinguished look. He spoke with a slight European accent that Mom found charming. His demeanor was respectful but warm, and he seemed genuinely interested in Mom's stories about the family business and history. "I think we've found our caregiver," Mom declared after the interview. And for once, my brother and I were in complete agreement. Stefan started the following week, 3 days on, 4 days off, living in the guest house on Mom's property during his shifts. He seemed to have an intuitive understanding of Mom's condition. He established routines, gently reminded her of things without making her feel diminished, and even implemented memory exercises the doctor had recommended. During our weekly calls, Mom raved about Stefan. "He's made the most delicious schnitzel last night," or "Stefan helped me sort through those old photos I've been meaning to organize for years." According to Mom, Stefan was nothing short of miraculous. Even better, when I called her doctor for updates, he reported that her condition appeared to be stabilizing, possibly even improving slightly. "Whatever you're doing, keep it up," the doctor encouraged. Cognitive engagement and emotional security can sometimes slow progression. For 6 months, everything seemed perfect. I visited monthly at first, then quarterly, as my own work demands increased and my confidence in Stefan grew. He sent regular updates, managed Mum's medication, and even accompanied her to doctor's appointments, taking detailed notes that he shared with both my brother and me. Then came the visit that changed everything. I arrived for my quarterly check-in, expecting the usual warm welcome from Mum and a detailed report from Stefan. Instead, Mom greeted me at the door with unusual excitement. "Darling, I have wonderful news. I want you to be the first to know. Well, the first family member anyway." She pulled Stefan to her side, their hands intertwined. Something about their body language made my stomach drop even before she spoke again. "Stefan and I were married 2 months ago. Isn't it wonderful? I finally found love again after your father." I stared at them, trying to process what I was hearing. Mum, with her progressive dementia, had married her caregiver, and no one had thought to inform her children. Stefan smiled placidly. "We wanted to tell you in person. Your mother was concerned you might not understand. It was just a small ceremony at the courthouse," Mum continued, oblivious to my shock. "We didn't want a fuss. At our age, why wait? Life is short." I struggled to keep my composure. Stefan was more than 30 years her junior. He was her employee, hired specifically because of her vulnerable condition. Everything about the situation screamed exploitation. but I could see how happy Mum seemed. Challenging her directly might only cause her distress. This is certainly surprising, I managed. I wish you told me beforehand. We're still the same, Mum assured me. Stefan will continue caring for me just now as my husband. Nothing else has to change. But everything had already changed. Throughout that visit, I noticed subtle differences in their dynamic. Stefan was more authoritative, less deferential. He spoke over Mom at times, answered questions directed at her. When I tried to speak with Mom alone, he found reasons to stay in the room. I called my brother as soon as I left. He was as stunned as I was, immediately suspicious of Stefan's intentions. We consulted a lawyer who specialized in elder care law, who confirmed our fears. As Mom's husband, Stefan now had significant legal rights regardless of our power of attorney documentation. Unfortunately, marriage trumps many other legal arrangements, the lawyer explained. Unless you can prove she wasn't competent to consent to marriage or that coercion was involved, the marriage is legally binding. We immediately requested copies of Mum's recent medical records and were disturbed by what we found. While earlier reports had indicated stabilization, more recent evaluations showed concerning cognitive decline. Most troubling, the marriage certificate was dated during a period when her neurologist had documented that she lacks capacity to understand complex financial or legal decisions. My brother flew in, and together we confronted Stefan, expressing our concerns about the propriety of his relationship with Mom. He responded with wounded indignation. Your mother is lonely. She deserves companionship and love in her final years. I'm deeply hurt you would suggest my intentions are anything but honorable. Mom became distressed during the conversation, siding completely with Stefan. Why can't you be happy for me? Stefan loves me. He takes care of me when my own children are too busy. That barb hurt, especially since we had deliberately hired care so Mom wouldn't have to leave her home. But I recognized the uncharacteristic nastiness wasn't really her. It was the disease, perhaps manipulated by Stefan. We backed off temporarily, not wanting to upset Mom further, but increased our monitoring. I arranged to visit more frequently. My brother spoke with her doctors, alerting them to our concerns. We began documenting everything, building a case in case we needed legal intervention. 6 months after the marriage revelation, Mum passed away unexpectedly. The doctor cited complications from her dementia, though it seemed to progress much more rapidly than initially projected. We were devastated not just by her loss, but by the circumstances. Had we failed to protect her? Could we have done more? Then came the breaking point. At the reading of the will, we discovered Mom had apparently changed her entire estate plan just weeks before her death. The previous will, which had divided the family property and business between her children and grandchildren, had been replaced with a new document leaving everything, the historic home, the business, all financial assets, to Stefan. This can't be right, I protested to the estate attorney. Mum would never disinherit her family. This business has been passed down for 4 generations. Stefan sat silently, a picture of grief, occasionally dabbing at his eyes with a handkerchief. Elizabeth wanted to ensure I would be taken care of, he said softly. She worried about me being alone after she was gone. The coldness in his eyes belied the performance of sorrow. In that moment, I knew with absolute certainty that my mother had been the victim of a calculated predator. What happened next? Nobody saw it coming. Our lawyer requested an analysis of Mom's medication records and discovered shocking irregularities. Stefan had been systematically administering incorrect dosages, sometimes withholding medications that stabilized her condition, other times doubling doses of medications known to cause confusion. The pattern suggested deliberate manipulation of her cognitive state, making her more lucid when doctors or family visited, then increasing her confusion when he wanted her compliant for legal matters. Further investigation revealed this wasn't Stefan's first marriage. He had used different names, but his pattern was consistent, securing jobs caring for wealthy elderly individuals, particularly those with cognitive impairments, gradually isolating them from family, then manipulating them into marriage and changing their wills. In 2 previous cases, the families had settled rather than endure protracted legal battles. We wouldn't be settling. The evidence of manipulation, combined with the medical records showing Mum's documented lack of capacity, gave us a strong case. We challenged both the marriage and the will, and filed criminal charges for elder abuse. The legal battle lasted nearly 2 years. Stefan fought viciously, using Mum's money that should have stayed in our family, to fund his defense. But in the end, justice prevailed. The court invalidated the marriage posthumously based on Mum's lack of capacity to consent. The revised will was thrown out, and the original family will reinstated. Stefan was convicted of elder abuse and fraud, receiving a 10-year prison sentence. We later learned he had targeted our mother specifically after reading a local business article featuring the family company. He had meticulously researched her, our family, and even befriended her regular pharmacy staff to gain their trust. The level of calculation was chilling. The family business continues now, run by my brother and me in Mom's memory. We've established a foundation in her name focused on preventing elder abuse, particularly financial exploitation, and we've implemented a speaker series at senior centers, sharing our story as a cautionary tale. Mum's experience taught us that predators don't always look threatening. Sometimes they come bearing gifts, offering comfort, presenting themselves as the solution to loneliness or fear. The most dangerous wolves are the ones who know how to dress perfectly as sheep. That story of exploitation was disturbing, but wait until you hear about the dog walker who turned pet care into a blackmail operation. My husband and I both work demanding jobs in tech. He's an executive at a fintech startup, and I manage client relationships for a cybersecurity firm. The irony of that last part still makes me cringe. When we adopted our 2 rescue dogs, Baxter and Lily, we were determined to give them the best life possible despite our busy schedules. That meant finding someone reliable to walk them during the day. After researching different options, I settled on Paw Pals, an app that connects pet owners with vetted dog walkers in their area. The reviews were stellar, and they claimed to do thorough background checks. That's how Megan came into our lives. She seemed perfect from the start, young but responsible, genuinely fond of animals, and flexible with our sometimes unpredictable schedules. The app allowed us to track her walks through GPS and even get photo updates. The dogs adored her, which was the most important thing. Baxter, who's usually wary of strangers, warmed up to her immediately. That should have been my first clue something was off. In hindsight, she was probably sneaking them treats from day one to win their trust. For the first 3 months, everything was seamless. Megan was always on time, the dogs were well exercised and happy, and we had one less thing to worry about. We even gave her a key to our house so she could access the dogs more easily. We trusted her completely. Then little things started happening. Small comments that felt just slightly off. One evening, she mentioned how cute it was that my husband still called me by my college nickname, Sonny. It wasn't something I remembered telling her, but I figured it had come up in conversation at some point. A week later, she texted to ask if my husband was feeling better. "He seemed under the weather yesterday," she wrote. The thing is, he had been sick, but he'd been home all day working from the bedroom. Megan had only been in the living room and kitchen to get the dogs. There was no way she could have seen him. "Oh, you must have heard him coughing," I replied, brushing it off. Then came the comment about my husband's promotion. He'd been offered a significant step up at his company, but we hadn't told anyone yet. We were waiting until it was officially announced. Somehow, Megan knew. "Congratulations to Mike on the new position," she said during a handoff one evening. "That's so exciting." When I asked how she knew, she backpedaled awkwardly. "Oh, I think I saw an email notification pop up on his laptop one day when it was on the kitchen counter. I wasn't snooping, I promise." It sounded plausible enough, but something felt wrong. Mike was always careful with his work devices. I mentioned it to him that night, and he confirmed he never leaves his laptop anywhere but his office, with the door closed. Things went from strange to genuinely concerning when Megan started referencing specific conversations we'd had in our home. Debates about vacation destinations, a disagreement about whether to renovate the kitchen, discussions about possibly trying for a baby. These were all private conversations that happened when she wasn't present. "It's like she's a fly on the wall," I told Mike one night. "It's creeping me out." Then came the incident that confirmed our fears. Mike's company was in sensitive negotiations for a merger, the kind of deal where even the smallest leak could tank stock prices and kill the whole thing. The discussions were highly confidential, with only the C-suite executives and board members aware of the details. One evening, Mike's CEO called him in a panic. He'd received an anonymous email threatening to expose the merger talks to competitors unless a substantial consulting fee was paid to an offshore account. The email included verbatim quotes from a conversation Mike had had with the CEO, over the phone, in our living room, after hours. "Someone's listening to my calls," Mike said, his face pale. "This is industrial espionage." We immediately contacted a private security firm who swept our house for bugs while we stayed at a hotel. What they found was far more extensive than we'd imagined. Tiny cameras had been strategically placed throughout our home, one disguised as a smoke detector in the living room, another hidden in a decorative clock in the kitchen, a third embedded in the air vent in Mike's home office, and most disturbingly, one in our bedroom concealed in the cable box. The security consultant was blunt. "This isn't amateur hour. These are professional-grade devices with encrypted transmission capabilities. Someone invested serious money to monitor you." The timestamps on the devices showed they'd been installed approximately 2 months earlier, well within the time frame Megan had been walking our dogs. When we shared our suspicions about her, the security team advised us to maintain normalcy, while they involved law enforcement. For the next week, we pretended everything was fine. We kept our conversations superficial and took walks outside to discuss anything important. Megan continued coming to walk the dogs, completely unaware that we were now watching her through our own hidden camera system, and that's when everything unraveled. The footage captured Megan systematically checking our mail, photographing documents in Mike's office, and even using a specialized device to clone his work phone while it was charging. Most damning of all, we caught her installing a new camera in the kitchen pendant light. The police moved quickly after that. They arrested Megan as she was leaving our house and executed a search warrant on her apartment. What they found shocked even the seasoned detectives. She had a sophisticated monitoring station where she tracked multiple households simultaneously. The operation went far beyond just our family. She had been surveilling at least 3 other homes in our neighborhood, all belonging to executives at different technology companies. The investigation revealed that Megan wasn't acting alone. She was part of a corporate espionage ring that specifically targeted executives through their personal lives. The dog-walking job was just her cover. The group would identify potential targets, place someone in their homes through service jobs like pet care or cleaning, and then use the gathered information for blackmail or to gain competitive advantages for rival companies. Here's where it gets absurd. During her interrogation, Megan revealed she'd been recruited through what she thought was a modeling agency. She'd gone in hoping for fashion work and instead got pulled into what they called performance intelligence gathering. They trained her in surveillance techniques, social engineering, and basic technological infiltration. She was paid a base salary plus commissions on valuable information, far more than she could make legitimately as a part-time dog walker. "They told me it was just corporate research," she claimed. "I didn't realize it was illegal." The detectives didn't buy her innocent act for a second, especially when they found evidence she'd done similar work in 2 other cities before moving to our area. The case expanded rapidly as authorities uncovered the broader network. Megan eventually cooperated in exchange for a reduced sentence, helping identify the ringleaders. In total, 11 people were arrested, including a former intelligence officer who had established the operation. As for us, the aftermath has been challenging. Despite multiple sweeps by security professionals, we've discovered additional devices months later, one in a bookshelf, another in the thermostat. The feeling of violation lingers. We've since moved to a new house and implemented stringent security measures, but the paranoia is hard to shake. Mike's company added special protections for all their executives after the incident, including regular security sweeps of their homes and security training for family members. My cybersecurity firm now uses our case as an anonymized example in client trainings about how physical security breaches often precede data theft. Megan is currently serving an 8-year sentence for multiple counts of invasion of privacy, wiretapping, corporate espionage, and attempted extortion. The leaders of the ring receive much longer sentences, with the mastermind facing 25 years in federal prison. The most disturbing aspect of the whole ordeal wasn't just the privacy violation. It was the realization of how easily we had welcomed the threat into our home. We had literally given her the keys, all because she had good reviews on an app and our dogs liked her. It's made us question every service provider we allow into our lives now. The Paw Pals app has since implemented additional security measures, including more thorough background checks and regular review of walker behavior patterns. They've also added features that limit the access walkers need to clients' homes, like lockboxes and smart locks that provide temporary access codes. As for Baxter and Lily, they adjusted to their new walker quickly enough, though we now have cameras watching the walker rather than the other way around. Some lessons you only need to learn once. Corporate espionage in your own home is terrifying, but imagine discovering your spouse's book club had a sinister agenda all along. I've always been the stereotypical absent-minded scientist, brilliant in the lab but somewhat oblivious to the social dynamics around me. My wife Lydia often joked that I'd forget my own birthday if she didn't remind me, and she wasn't entirely wrong. While I was buried in my work developing next-generation neural implants that could potentially revolutionize treatment for Parkinson's disease, Lydia was the one who maintained our social calendar and kept our home life running smoothly. So when Lydia mentioned she'd been invited to join an exclusive book club, I was genuinely happy for her. We'd relocated to Boston for my position at Neurotech Innovations, and she'd been struggling to build a social network in our new city. The book club seemed perfect, intellectually stimulating, and a chance to make friends with like-minded women. It's led by a literature professor from MIT, Lydia told me excitedly. Diane Mercer. She's brilliant, James. The way she breaks down literary themes and connects them to modern society is fascinating. The club met every Tuesday evening, and soon Lydia added a second meeting on Friday afternoons for what she called their deeper analysis sessions. She'd come home energized, her notebook filled with observations about symbolism and narrative structures. Sometimes she'd try to engage me in conversations about whatever they were reading, modern literary fiction that honestly held little interest for me compared to the neural mapping problems I was tackling at work. You should hear how Diane connects the protagonist's journey to the collective unconscious, Lydia would say, her eyes bright with intellectual excitement. It's changing how I see everything. I nodded and smiled, genuinely pleased that she'd found something so fulfilling. If I'm being honest, her new enthusiasm for the book club was convenient for me as well. It gave me more time to focus on the breakthrough we were approaching at Neurotech. Our implant prototype was showing unprecedented success in preliminary trials, and we were racing to file comprehensive patents before beginning the FDA approval process. About 6 months after Lydia joined the book club, I started noticing subtle changes in her questions about my work. We'd always discussed my projects in general terms. She had a background in biology, though she'd left the field to pursue marketing before we met. But now her questions became more specific, more technical. So, the electrode array you're designing, is it using gold alloy or platinum? She'd ask casually over dinner. Or, that signal processing algorithm you mentioned yesterday, is it similar to the one in the Jensen paper from last year's neurology symposium? I didn't think much of it at first. I assumed she was taking more interest in my work, maybe because she saw how excited I was about our progress. I answered her questions openly, not sharing proprietary information, of course, but discussing the general approaches and challenges. Then one day at work, our legal team called an emergency meeting. A competitor, BioSync Therapeutics, had filed patent applications with the USPTO that bore suspicious similarities to our confidential research. Not identical enough to prove direct theft, but close enough that it couldn't be coincidence. Someone's leaking information, our chief counsel said grimly. These applications address specific technical hurdles we only solved 2 months ago. The timing is too convenient. We implemented strict new security protocols, limited access to lab areas, no documents leaving the building, compartmentalized information so no single researcher had the complete picture, standard corporate espionage countermeasures. But the leaks continued. Somehow BioSync seemed to know our next moves almost as we made them. Our legal team was building a case for corporate espionage, but without knowing how the information was being accessed, we couldn't plug the leak. The breakthrough came from an unexpected direction. Our head of IT security, Monica, asked to speak with me privately one afternoon. I've been monitoring all digital communications as authorized by the investigation, she began, looking uncomfortable, and I found something unusual. It's about your wife's book club. She showed me what she'd discovered. Diane Mercer, the supposed literature professor, had no affiliation with MIT or any other university. In fact, Diane Mercer didn't exist before 3 years ago. More disturbing, several other members of the book club were married to researchers and executives at competing biotech firms. It could be coincidence, Monica said cautiously. But given the situation, I didn't want to believe it. The idea that Lydia could be involved in corporate espionage was absurd. She was the most ethical person I knew, but the pattern was too suspicious to ignore. That evening, while Lydia was at her Friday book club meeting, I did something I'm not proud of. I went through her book club materials. Her notebook contained what appeared to be literary analysis at first glance. But as I read more carefully, I noticed odd technical terms embedded within discussions of metaphor and symbolism, references to the protagonist's neural pathway, and the golden interface between conscious and subconscious that seemed out of place in literary criticism. With growing horror, I realized I was looking at my own research, thinly disguised in literary language. The powerful metaphors Lydia had been so excited about were coded descriptions of our proprietary technology. When she came home that evening, bubbling with enthusiasm about their discussion of a novel I'd never heard of, I couldn't maintain the pretense. I confronted her with what I'd found. "James, what are you talking about?" she asked, genuinely confused. "Those are just my book notes." I pointed out specific passages, connecting them to projects at Neurotech. As I explained the parallels, I watched the color drain from her face. "That's not possible," she whispered. "We were analyzing the book's exploration of memory and consciousness. Diane said my insights were particularly valuable because of my science background. And that's when everything unraveled. Lydia hadn't been knowingly sharing corporate secrets. She'd been manipulated into doing so. Diane would steer discussions toward themes that paralleled my work, encouraging Lydia to draw from her background knowledge to enrich their analysis. The other women would ask seemingly innocent questions that prompted Lydia to share more specific details, all under the guise of literary discussion. "She said my unique perspective was what made the group so special," Lydia said, her voice breaking, "that my ability to connect scientific concepts with literary themes was opening new avenues of interpretation." The betrayal cut Lydia deeply. These women she'd considered friends, this mentor she'd admired, all had been using her. The intellectual validation she'd treasured was nothing but manipulation. We took our discoveries to Neurotech's legal team, who immediately involved the FBI. What they uncovered was far more extensive than we'd imagined. The book club was actually a sophisticated corporate espionage operation. Diane, whose real name was Elaine Kovacs, had run similar schemes in 3 other biotech hubs across the country. She would identify spouses of key researchers, engineers, and executives, carefully selecting for those with some scientific background, but who weren't directly in the field. The literary analysis framework provided perfect cover for extracting and encoding technical information. The women weren't discussing books, they were mining their partners for valuable intellectual property that was then compiled, decoded, and sold to competing firms. The notes were translated back into technical language and provided to corporate buyers as independent research. Here's where it gets absurd. The FBI discovered that Diane ran her operation like an actual publishing company. She had editors who would compile the gathered intelligence, fact-checkers who would verify the technical details against published research, and even literary agents who would shop the stolen information to potential corporate buyers. They had price tiers based on the exclusivity of the information. A company could pay premium rates for sole access, or lower rates for information that would be published widely, sold to multiple competitors. The book choices themselves were part of the scheme. Each novel was selected because its themes could be metaphorically connected to the targeted technologies. When they were focusing on my neural implant work, they read novels about memory and consciousness. When they were targeting a pharmaceutical firm's drug research, they read novels about transformation and healing. The literary discussions provided a framework for extracting specific technical details without raising suspicion. The FBI set up an elaborate sting operation. With Lydia's cooperation, they fabricated some breakthrough information about our neural interface that would be immediately recognizable if it appeared in a competitor's research. Lydia fed this information to the group through their carefully coded literary discussions. Within 3 weeks, the information had made its way to BioSync Therapeutics, giving the FBI the evidence they needed. The arrests were coordinated across multiple cities. Diane and 14 others were taken into custody. 7 corporations were implicated in knowingly purchasing stolen intellectual property. The FBI estimated the scheme had compromised patents and trade secrets worth over $300 million. Most of the other wives had been unwitting participants like Lydia, manipulated through their desire for intellectual community and validation. A few, however, had been knowing accomplices, recruited after Diane recognized their financial troubles or resentment toward their partners' companies. Lydia was devastated. Beyond the betrayal by people she'd considered friends, she felt crushing guilt for her unwitting role in compromising my work. It took months of therapy for her to understand that she had been the victim, not the perpetrator. The experience left her with a wariness about relationships that still lingers years later. Diane, or Elaine, is currently serving a 20-year federal sentence for industrial espionage, wire fraud, and racketeering. BioSync Therapeutics paid substantial damages to Neurotech and other affected companies, and 3 of their executives faced criminal charges for knowingly purchasing stolen intellectual property. As for our neural implant technology, the patents were eventually secured, though the development timeline was set back nearly a year. The first devices are now in clinical trials, showing promising results for Parkinson's patients. Lydia eventually joined a real book club, this one through the public library, with transparent membership and no hidden agendas. She's much more guarded now about what she shares, even in casual conversation. Sometimes I catch her second-guessing an innocent remark, and I'm reminded of how deeply the experience wounded her. The whole ordeal taught us both that espionage doesn't always look like a shadowy figure breaking into an office. Sometimes it's a friendly face offering connection, validation, and community, while systematically extracting your most valuable secrets, one seemingly innocent conversation at a time. Patents and trade secrets are valuable targets, but imagine discovering your son's tutor had an even more personal motivation for getting close to your family. My son Alex was always a bright kid, straight A student, captain of the debate team, the kind of teenager who actually talked to his parents about his day. So when his grades started slipping in his junior year of high school, we knew something was wrong. At first, we thought it might be typical teenage stuff, maybe a broken heart, or just the pressure of college applications looming on the horizon. "I'm fine, Dad," he'd say whenever I asked. "Just a lot going on." But the C on his calculus midterm told a different story. This was a kid who'd never brought home anything lower than a B+ in his life. My wife suggested getting him a tutor, just until he got back on track. As the CEO of Medical Pharmaceuticals, I had the resources to hire the best. Our family friend, a professor at the local university, recommended one of his graduate students, a bright young woman named Veronica, who was working on her master's in biochemistry. "She's brilliant," he assured us, "and not much older than Alex, so he might relate to her better than an older tutor." Veronica impressed us from her first visit. She was articulate, professional, and seemed genuinely interested in helping Alex succeed. She claimed to be 22, fresh out of undergrad, and working on her advanced degree. With her glasses and conservative clothing, she looked like the quintessential serious student. Alex was initially resistant to the idea of tutoring. What teenager wants to admit they need help? But after the first session with Veronica, his attitude completely changed. "She explains things so much better than my teachers," he told us, suddenly enthusiastic about calculus in a way I'd never seen before. "She makes it all make sense." The sessions started as twice weekly, then increased to 3 times a week at Veronica's suggestion. "Alex has a lot of potential," she told us. "I think with some focused work, he could even consider applying to MIT or Caltech." Within a month, his grades had improved dramatically. But more than that, Alex seemed energized, motivated in a way that went beyond academics. He started dressing better, paying more attention to his appearance. At the time, I chalked it up to increased confidence from his academic success. Looking back, all the signs were there, but I was too focused on his improving grades to see them. The tutoring sessions often ran late, sometimes until 10 or 11 at night. We lost track of time working through these problem sets, Veronica would explain, looking appropriately apologetic. My wife occasionally expressed concern about the late hours, but I brushed it off. "She's helping him turn things around," I argued. "And he's almost 18. We should trust him to manage his time." What I didn't know then was that calculus had become code for something else entirely. The first hint that something unusual was happening came when I noticed small things in my home office seemed out of place. Files I was certain I'd left in one drawer would be in another. My laptop would be at a slightly different angle than I'd left it. Nothing concrete enough to raise real alarm bells, just enough to give me that nagging feeling something wasn't right. Around the same time, one of our competitors suddenly accelerated development on a drug compound suspiciously similar to our most promising confidential project. Our legal team was concerned, but without evidence of how they'd obtained our research, we couldn't prove corporate espionage. Then came the breaking point. I had been working late at the office and came home around 1 a.m., expecting to find the house dark and everyone asleep. Instead, I noticed a soft glow coming from under my home office door. Thinking Alex might be using my computer for a late-night study session, I opened the door quietly. The room was empty, but my computer was on, and several files were open on the screen. Confidential files about our drug research that I never accessed on my home computer. The screensaver kicked in as I stood there, puzzled, and I noticed a small device plugged into the USB port that I didn't recognize. Instead of confronting anyone that night, I decided to investigate further. The next day, I had our company's cybersecurity team check my computer. They found a keylogger installed, a device that recorded every keystroke made on the computer, including passwords. They also discovered several of our most sensitive research documents had been accessed and copied. "This is professional-grade equipment," our security chief told me, "not something a random hacker would use. Someone specifically targeting your company data." We decided to set a trap. I didn't tell my wife or Alex, not wanting to alarm them, until I knew what was happening. Our security team installed discrete cameras in my home office and throughout the main areas of our house. They also placed GPS trackers on the copies of files we knew had been accessed, so we'd be alerted if they were moved or copied again. 3 nights later, during what was supposed to be another late tutoring session, I received an alert on my phone. Someone had entered my office and was accessing the tagged files. I pulled up the security feed on my phone and watched in disbelief as Veronica, not Alex, systematically photographed documents from my files with a high-resolution camera disguised as a pen. The footage that followed was even more disturbing. After finishing in my office, she returned to the living room where Alex waited. What I saw next made my blood run cold. Their interaction was clearly not that of tutor and student. They were intimate in a way that made it obvious this had been going on for some time. She was skillfully manipulating my teenage son, using their relationship to gain access to our home and my confidential information. The security team continued monitoring, gathering evidence, while I struggled with how to handle the situation. The following night brought the final confirmation we needed. After Alex had fallen asleep, Veronica slipped out of his room at 3 a.m. and returned to my office, this time downloading files directly from my computer onto a specialized drive. I contacted the FBI, who moved quickly given the corporate espionage angle. They advised us on how to proceed without tipping Veronica off while they built their case. For 2 excruciating days, we had to pretend everything was normal, while federal agents gathered the evidence they needed. What happened next? Nobody saw it coming. The FBI didn't just arrest Veronica, they conducted simultaneous raids on our competitors' offices and the homes of 3 of their executives. It turned out Veronica wasn't a 22-year-old grad student at all. She was 26, had already completed her master's degree, and was working directly for our competitors' R&D department. The tutoring role had been created specifically to gain access to our home after their security team identified Alex as a potential vulnerability in my information security. The most heartbreaking part was telling Alex. When we finally sat him down with the FBI agents and showed him the evidence, he was in complete denial at first. "She loves me," he insisted, his voice breaking. "This is some kind of mistake." Then the agents played recordings they'd recovered from Veronica's apartment, intimate conversations where she had skillfully extracted information about my work from Alex, who had been eager to impress this older woman with his knowledge of his father's business. They also showed him text messages between Veronica and her real boyfriend, mocking how easily she'd manipulated a lovesick teenager. Watching my son's heart break in real time is something I'll never forget. The betrayal was total, not just a first love turning out to be false, but the realization that every moment of what he thought was a genuine connection had been calculated manipulation, and that's when everything unraveled. In the aftermath of Veronica's arrest, we discovered just how extensive her operation had been. She hadn't just accessed my files, she'd planted additional surveillance devices throughout our home, She'd been systematically gathering information about our family, our habits, even our financial details. The FBI found a dossier in her apartment with information about all of us. Details about my wife's schedule, Alex's friends, even our younger daughter's school activities. The case against Veronica and our competitor was airtight. She eventually pled guilty to multiple charges, including corporate espionage, fraud, and, given Alex's age in our state, statutory rape. The company she worked for faced massive fines and criminal charges for several executives who had orchestrated the scheme, but the legal resolution did little to heal the psychological damage to Alex. He withdrew completely, his grades plummeting again as he dealt with the trauma of such profound betrayal. He required intensive therapy to work through not just the manipulation and heartbreak, but the guilt he felt for being used to compromise his family's security. "I should have known," he kept saying in those early weeks. "How could I have been so stupid?" The therapy helped him understand that he hadn't been stupid. He'd been specifically targeted by a trained professional who had exploited his normal teenage vulnerabilities. Veronica had been selected for this operation precisely because she knew how to manipulate someone Alex's age, and she'd had the full resources of a pharmaceutical company backing her elaborate deception. The lawsuit against the competitor dragged on for nearly 2 years. During the discovery process, we learned this wasn't their first attempt at corporate espionage, just their most elaborate. They had previously hired conventional hackers and even attempted to recruit employees from our company, but had failed to get the specific research they were after. The most powerful moment in the whole ordeal came during the trial, when Alex chose to testify. Despite his therapist's concerns about the potential trauma of facing Veronica in court, he insisted on telling his story directly to the jury. At 18, his testimony was no longer required for the statutory charges, but he wanted to speak about the corporate espionage aspects of the case. "I need to take back my story," he told us the night before his testimony. "I need her to see me as a person who is standing up to what she did, not just a pawn she manipulated." In the courtroom, he spoke with a composure that amazed everyone present. He detailed how Veronica had gradually shifted their conversations from academics to personal matters, how she had expressed interest in his life and future in ways that made him feel special and mature. He explained how she had casually asked about my work, encouraging him to show off his knowledge about pharmaceuticals, making him feel intelligent and valued. "She made me believe I was special," he told the jury, his voice steady, "that she saw something in me no one else did, but the only thing special about me to her was my last name and my access to my father's home office." Veronica never looked at him once during his testimony. She stared straight ahead, her face expressionless, as the person she had used as a mere tool in her scheme revealed the very human cost of her actions. The jury took less than 4 hours to return a guilty verdict on all counts, the judge citing the particularly calculated and cruel nature of the espionage scheme, sentenced Veronica to 12 years in federal prison. The competing pharmaceutical company eventually settled our civil suit for an amount that, while substantial, could never fully compensate for the damage done to our family. 4 years later, Alex is now in college studying computer security of all things. He says his experience gave him a unique perspective on how vulnerabilities can be exploited, not just in systems, but in people. The therapy continues, but he's rebuilding his life with a resilience that makes me profoundly proud. As for me, I've become something of a crusader for awareness about corporate espionage tactics that target families. I regularly speak at industry conferences about our experience, warning other executives that the most dangerous security breach might not come through their company firewalls, but through their front door. Family betrayals cut deep, but wait until you hear how one private investigator was playing both sides of a dangerous game. I started my own tech consulting firm with 2 partners, David and Marcus, right after college. We'd been roommates, stayed up coding together until 3 a.m., dreamed of changing the world with our ideas. The classic startup story. 10 years later, our company, Vertex Solutions, had grown from a cramped apartment operation to a legitimate mid-size firm with 40 employees and contracts with several Fortune 500 companies. We'd maintained equal partnership shares, 33.3% each, despite my role as CEO and primary client relationship manager. David handled our technical operations, and Marcus oversaw finances and administration. The arrangement worked well for years. We trusted each other implicitly, or so I thought. The first sign something was off came when I noticed discrepancies in our quarterly financial reports. Nothing major, just small inconsistencies in project expenditures versus reported costs. When I asked Marcus about them, he always had plausible explanations: delayed vendor invoices, accounting software issues, or reclassification of expenses. We're still adjusting to the new accounting system, he'd say. There are always reconciliation issues during a transition. I wanted to believe him, but the explanations started feeling rehearsed. Around the same time, I noticed David and Marcus having hushed conversations that would stop abruptly when I approached. They started scheduling meetings without me, claiming they were discussing technical aspects of projects I wasn't involved in. My suspicion grew when I discovered a subsidiary, LLC, had been formed using company funds, with both David and Marcus listed as managing members, but not me. When confronted, they claimed it was a special purpose vehicle for a potential government contract that required specific security clearances. "We were going to bring you in once it was established," David explained. "The paperwork is just taking longer than expected." Maybe that was true, but my instincts told me otherwise. Rather than confront them directly, I decided to gather evidence first. On the recommendation of a college friend who'd become a corporate attorney, I hired Victor Renault, a private investigator who specialized in corporate malfeasance. Victor was everything you'd expect from a seasoned PI: methodical, discreet, and confident. His office in a renovated industrial building downtown was tastefully understated, with credentials displayed subtly on the walls. He'd worked with several tech companies and came highly recommended. "What you're describing sounds like classic embezzlement patterns," he said during our initial meeting. "Partners often think they're being clever with these subsidiary structures, but they leave trails. I'll find them if they exist." We agreed on terms, and Victor began his investigation. For the next 3 months, he provided weekly reports detailing increasingly damning evidence: shell companies receiving regular payments from our corporate accounts, inflated vendor invoices with kickbacks to personal accounts, and systematic diversion of company resources to side projects neither David nor Marcus had disclosed to me. Victor's evidence was meticulous and convincing: bank statements, corporate filings, even photographs of Marcus meeting with people identified as representatives of competing firms. According to Victor's investigation, my partners had diverted nearly $2.3 million over the past 2 years. "They're planning to launch a competing operation," Victor explained in what was supposed to be our final meeting. "The evidence suggests they're preparing to leave, taking your top clients and intellectual property with them." I was devastated but resolute. I contacted our corporate attorney, who advised immediate action. We prepared legal documents to freeze company assets and scheduled a formal confrontation with David and Marcus for Monday morning, with our legal team present. The Sunday night before the meeting, someone slipped a package under my apartment door. No return address, no note. Just a USB drive and a stack of printed documents. Curious and cautious, I plugged the drive into an old laptop I kept for testing. What I found turned my world upside down. The drive contained audio recordings of Victor meeting with David and Marcus, not to investigate them, but to plot against me. In one recording, Victor laughed as he described how easily I had believed his fabricated evidence. "He's eating it up," Victor said. "Completely convinced you guys are the villains in this story." The doctored bank statements were especially effective. David's voice replied, "Once he tries to use these in court, he'll destroy his own credibility. No judge will believe anything else he brings forward after that." The printed documents included original versions of the evidence Victor had provided me, showing how they'd been manipulated to create a false narrative. There were also photos of Victor with David and Marcus dating back 3 years, long before I'd hired him. The most damning document was an engagement letter showing Victor had been on my partner's payroll since before I approached him, and that's when everything unraveled. The entire investigation had been orchestrated to lead me into making false accusations that would discredit me. My partners had discovered I was suspicious, likely from monitoring my company email, and set up this elaborate trap. Victor was never working for me. He'd been their fixer for years, helping them cover their tracks while they actually did embezzle from the company. What made no sense was why someone would expose their own scheme. The answer came in a text message I received while still processing the contents of the USB drive. Parking garage, level 3, yellow section, 20 minutes, come alone. Against my better judgment, I went. Sitting in a car with tinted windows was a woman I recognized as Victor's assistant, Lydia. She'd always been in the background during our meetings, taking notes and organizing files. "I can't be part of this anymore," she said, not bothering with pleasantries. "What they're doing to you is wrong, and it goes deeper than what you saw on that drive." Lydia explained that she'd worked for Victor for 4 years, initially believing his business was legitimate. Gradually, she realized he specialized in fixing situations for wealthy clients, manufacturing evidence, tampering with witnesses, creating false narratives that would hold up under legal scrutiny. "Your partners approached him 2 years ago when they started skimming from the company," she explained. "Victor helped them cover their tracks, create the shell companies, hide the money. When you got suspicious and hired him, which they orchestrated by having your friend recommend him, they saw an opportunity to discredit you completely. Here's where it gets absurd. The plan was to let me make accusations based on falsified evidence, then reveal the manipulation in court, making any legitimate evidence I might later discover seem equally suspect. They would use my reckless accusations as grounds to force me out of the company entirely, with minimal compensation for my shares." "Why are you helping me?" I asked. "Because they're planning to frame me too," she said. "Once this is over, Victor intends to claim I was the one who manipulated the evidence without his knowledge. I found emails discussing it last week. I'll be the scapegoat if anything goes wrong." For the next 6 hours, Lydia and I worked in a 24-hour coffee shop, going through the real financial records she had been secretly copying for months. The actual embezzlement was even worse than the fictional version Victor had presented. Nearly $3.8 million had been siphoned off through an intricate web of fake vendors and consulting fees. Lydia also revealed that Victor had placed spyware on my devices during our first meeting, allowing my partners to monitor my every move. We left our phones in the car and used a burner laptop she had brought to contact a different attorney, one with no connection to our company. By morning, we had a new plan. Rather than the confrontation my partners were expecting, where I would present the fabricated evidence and fall into their trap, I arrived at the office with 2 attorneys, a forensic accountant, and a court-appointed observer. I also brought Lydia, who had agreed to testify in exchange for immunity. The look on their faces when we walked in was worth every sleepless minute of the night before. They had expected me to come in guns blazing with Victor's fake evidence. Instead, I calmly presented the legitimate documentation Lydia had provided, along with the recordings showing their conspiracy with Victor. "We have 2 options," I said, trying to keep my voice steady despite my anger and hurt. "We can handle this privately. You resign, return the stolen funds, and transfer your shares to the company at fair market value. Or we can involve law enforcement, and you can explain to our clients why our services will be interrupted while the FBI combs through our records." Marcus crumbled immediately, looking physically ill as he realized the trap had snapped shut on the trappers. David tried to maintain composure, suggesting the recordings could have been doctored, until my attorney played a particularly damning clip of him discussing how they would divide my clients after forcing me out. They chose the private option not out of any remorse, but to avoid criminal charges. The settlement process was painful and lengthy, but the company survived. Victor wasn't so lucky. Lydia's evidence led to the revocation of his PI license and multiple criminal charges from previous cases that came to light during the investigation. As for Lydia, her courage in coming forward saved both her reputation and my company. After the dust settled, I offered her a position heading our newly formed corporate security division. 3 years later, she's one of my most trusted executives, and Vertex Solutions has more than doubled in size, with a management team built on actual trust and transparency. Sometimes I think about the twisted irony of it all, how my partner's elaborate scheme to discredit me ended up being their downfall, and how the assistant they planned to scapegoat became their ultimate undoing. If they had simply been honest business partners, they'd still be wealthy, respected executives. Instead, their names are now cautionary tales in business ethics seminars. Double agents make for dangerous allies, but wait until you hear about this priest who turned spiritual counseling into a money-making scheme. My husband and I were going through what therapists diplomatically call a rough patch. The truth was a bit uglier. Mark had developed an emotional attachment to a coworker. Nothing physical had happened, he swore, But the text messages I discovered told a story of deepening emotional intimacy that felt like a betrayal just the same. We'd been married for 12 years, had built a comfortable life together, and neither of us wanted divorce. So we did what many couples in our situation do. We sought counseling. Since we were both raised Catholic, though neither of us had been particularly devout in adulthood, we decided to start with marriage counseling through our local parish. Father Michael had been at St. Catherine's for about 3 years. He was younger than most priests I'd known, maybe mid-40s, with a charismatic personality and a reputation for revitalizing the parish. Under his leadership, attendance had increased, and he'd launched several new ministries and outreach programs. He was exactly the kind of modern, approachable priest we thought might actually help us. Our first session went better than expected. Father Michael was compassionate but direct, creating space for both of us to express our pain without judgment. He seemed genuinely invested in helping us heal. Marriage is sacred, he told us, but it's also hard work. The fact that you're both here shows your commitment to that work. Over the next few weeks, we settled into a routine of weekly sessions. Father Michael skillfully guided our conversations, helping us communicate more honestly. Mark especially seemed to connect with him. They occasionally met one-on-one for what Father Michael called spiritual direction, focused on Mark's feelings of guilt and his desire to make amends. About a month into our counseling, Father Michael introduced a new element to our sessions. In my experience, he said, leaning forward with an earnest expression, spiritual healing and relationship healing often go hand in hand. Have you considered how charitable giving might be part of your reconciliation journey? He went on to explain how acts of generosity could create positive energy in a marriage, especially when one partner needed to atone for causing pain. It made a certain kind of sense, especially to Mark, who was desperate for tangible ways to demonstrate his commitment to rebuilding our relationship. Our parish has a special outreach program serving disadvantaged families, Father Michael explained. Anonymous donations allow couples like yourselves to contribute to something meaningful while focusing on your own healing. Mark latched onto the idea immediately. That week, he made our first donation, $1,000 to the St. Catherine's Outreach Program. It was generous but not outrageous given our financial situation. Father Michael was effusive in his gratitude. This kind of sacrifice is exactly what demonstrates true commitment to change, he told Mark during their next one-on-one session. Mark came home with a renewed sense of purpose, telling me he finally felt like he was doing something concrete to make amends. Over the next few months, Mark continued making donations, gradually increasing the amounts. Our counseling sessions became intertwined with updates about the wonderful work being done through the outreach program, though the details were always vague. Families being supported, lives being changed, communities being transformed. When I asked for more specific information, Father Michael would smile benevolently. The beauty of anonymous giving is detaching from the outcome. Your contribution creates ripples of positive change you may never see directly. It sounded lovely in theory, but my natural skepticism, enhanced by my background in accounting, was starting to kick in. One evening, I decided to check our finances and discovered that Mark had donated nearly $80,000 over the past 6 months. I was stunned. We weren't wealthy enough to casually give away that kind of money without significant impact on our financial security. Mark, this is almost our entire emergency fund, I said when I confronted him. We can't afford this level of giving. His reaction surprised me. Instead of the rational discussion I expected, he became defensive, almost angry. The program is working, he insisted. Our marriage is better than it's been in years. Father Michael says this kind of sacrificial giving is cleansing my spirit. He wasn't entirely wrong about our marriage improving. We were communicating better, and the emotional affair had ended completely. But something about the situation felt off to me. The improvement in our relationship seemed connected more to our honest conversations than to the increasingly large checks Mark was writing. The next time we met with Father Michael, I directly asked for more information about the outreach program. As the amounts have grown significant, I'd love to understand more about the impact we're having, I said, trying to sound curious rather than suspicious. Father Michael's usual warm demeanor cooled noticeably. The program serves many vulnerable people who value their privacy, he explained. detailed reporting could compromise that privacy. But I persisted, asking if there was any financial oversight or reporting structure. His answers grew increasingly evasive, with vague references to church governance and pastoral discretion. Then came the breaking point. When I requested to volunteer with the outreach program to see its work firsthand, Father Michael claimed it wasn't possible due to confidentiality concerns. That's when I knew something was deeply wrong. Legitimate charitable programs typically welcome volunteer involvement. Without telling Mark or Father Michael, I began investigating. First, I contacted the diocese financial office, asking about the St. Catherine's outreach program. They had minimal information, explaining that individual parish initiatives often operated with significant autonomy. Next, I reached out to other Catholic charities in our area, asking if they partnered with St. Catherine's outreach efforts. None had heard of any significant program there. The local Catholic Service Center, which coordinated most parish-based charitable activities in our region, expressed surprise at the amounts we donated, as St. Catherine's had reported only minimal outreach activities in recent years. Armed with growing suspicion, I took a day off work and visited the county records office. What I found was shocking. Father Michael had recently purchased a lakefront vacation property, paying $350,000 in cash. The timing aligned perfectly with the period of our largest donations. Still, I needed more evidence before making any accusations. I contacted a friend who worked for a local nonprofit, and she helped me access the church's publicly available financial disclosures. The official records showed only a small outreach budget, with no indication of the substantial donations Mark had been making. What happened next? Nobody saw it coming. I decided to attend a different Mass time than our usual service, hoping to speak with parish council members without Father Michael present. After Mass, I approached the council president, an older woman named Eleanor who had served the parish for decades. When I asked about the outreach program, her confusion was immediate and genuine. "We have a small food pantry and occasional emergency assistance fund," she explained, "but nothing that would involve donations of that magnitude." I showed her copies of our donation checks, all made out to St. Catherine's Outreach Program, as Father Michael had instructed. Eleanor's face paled. "These should have gone through the parish accounting system," she said. "I've never seen records of these donations." Together we approached the diocese with our concerns. Their internal investigation moved quickly and revealed the devastating truth. Father Michael had been running a sophisticated scheme targeting couples in crisis. The outreach program existed primarily on paper, with a legitimate small operation serving as cover for what was essentially a personal slush fund. He had specifically targeted couples seeking marriage counseling, especially those dealing with infidelity or similar betrayals. By exploiting the guilt of the offending spouse and framing donations as spiritual atonement, he had extracted hundreds of thousands of dollars over several years. We weren't his only victims. The investigation identified at least 7 other couples who had made significant anonymous donations to the non-existent program. The diocese was horrified and took immediate action. Father Michael was removed from ministry pending a full investigation. They also involved law enforcement, as the scheme constituted criminal fraud. The church worked to recover what funds they could, though much had already been spent on the vacation property and an extravagant lifestyle Father Michael maintained away from the parish. Telling Mark was one of the hardest conversations of my life. Initially, he refused to believe it, accusing me of undermining his spiritual journey and our reconciliation. But as the evidence mounted and the diocese confirmed the fraud, his denial crumbled into devastated betrayal. "I trusted him," Mark kept saying. "I thought I was doing something good, something healing." Ironically, the shared experience of being victimized created a new bond between us. Our marriage, which had been healing under false pretenses, now had to rebuild on a foundation of shared trauma and recovery. We attended real counseling with a licensed therapist, worked with financial advisors to recover what we could, and slowly rebuilt our trust in each other and in institutions. Father Michael eventually pled guilty to multiple counts of fraud and financial elder abuse, as some of his victims were elderly parishioners. He was sentenced to 6 years in prison and ordered to pay restitution, though the full amount will likely never be recovered. The diocese implemented stricter financial controls across all parishes and established a victim compensation fund, though it could only return a fraction of what was lost. St. Catherine's got a new priest who focused on rebuilding trust with a deeply wounded congregation. As for Mark and me, we're still married, still working through our issues, but with a hard-won wisdom about trust, forgiveness, and the complicated nature of redemption. We've even found our way back to faith, though it looks different now, more questioning, more personally defined, but perhaps more authentic for having been tested so severely. Sometimes I think about Father Michael, using his position of spiritual authority to prey on people at their most vulnerable. The calculated nature of his betrayal still stuns me. He didn't just take our money, he took advantage of our desire to heal and our trust in something bigger than ourselves. That's a special kind of betrayal that leaves scars far deeper than the financial loss. Religious trust being broken is devastating, but imagine the shock when a DNA test reveals a company employee has a very personal connection to your family. My wife Sarah and I did the Ancestry Link DNA test mostly as a joke. We'd been watching one of those shows where celebrities discover surprising heritage, and over a glass of wine, we decided it might be fun to see if either of us had any unexpected royal blood or exotic ancestry. The kits were on sale, so why not? The whole process was simple enough. Spit in a tube, seal it up, mail it off, and wait for the results. I didn't think much about it after sending our samples. 6 weeks later, we both received our results. Sarah discovered she was 22% Scandinavian, which explained her natural blonde hair that I'd always teased was from a bottle. My results were less exciting, mostly British and German, exactly what I'd expected. We had a good laugh about it, shared the results with friends on social media, and moved on with our lives. That should have been the end of the story. 3 weeks after receiving our results, I got an email from Ancestry Link customer service. A representative named Jason claimed there was an issue with my sample that required discussion. He asked if we could schedule a video call rather than handling it through email. Something about genetic markers that needed clarification, he said. It seemed odd, but I figured maybe they'd found some health concern they were legally required to disclose personally. I scheduled the call for my lunch break the following day. Jason appeared on screen, mid-20s, dark hair, professional demeanor. He started with standard customer service pleasantries before taking a deep breath. Mr. Davidson, I'm not actually calling about an issue with your sample. The test results are accurate. I'm calling because... He paused, visibly nervous. According to our database, you and I are a genetic match, a parent-child match specifically. I believe I'm your biological son. I nearly choked on my coffee. That's impossible, I said automatically. I don't have any children apart from my daughters with my wife. I was born on May 12, 1997, Jason continued. My mother's name is Rebecca Miller. You would have known her at Westlake University. The name hit me like a physical blow. Rebecca, my college girlfriend during sophomore and junior year. We'd been serious, or as serious as college relationships get. The timing lined up perfectly with our breakup in August 1996. She'd transferred to another school that fall, and we'd lost touch in the days before social media made it easy to keep tabs on former flames. Rebecca never told me she was pregnant, I said, my mind racing. We broke up when she transferred schools. I never heard from her again. Jason's expression hardened slightly. That's not how she tells it. She said you knew and wanted nothing to do with us, that you blocked her calls and told her to deal with it herself. That's absolutely not true, I insisted, feeling a surge of anger followed by confusion. I had no idea. I would never have abandoned my own child. Our conversation lasted over an hour. I called Sarah immediately afterward, and we talked through the night about what this meant for our family. We have twin daughters, Lily and Emma, now 16 years old. How would they feel about a half-brother who was almost 10 years older? How would this affect our lives? After several long discussions, Sarah and I decided to meet Jason in person. Despite the shocking revelation, I felt a genuine desire to know this young man who shared my DNA. If I truly had a son out there, I wanted to make up for the years I'd missed, even though the absence wasn't my choice. We arranged to meet at a restaurant near our home. The resemblance was undeniable once I saw him in person. He had my mother's eyes and my jaw structure. We spent hours talking about his life, his childhood, his interests. He'd graduated with a degree in computer science and had been working for Ancestry Link for about 8 months in their customer support division. When I joined the company, I wasn't looking for you specifically, Jason explained, but I've always wondered about you. When I gained access to the database and learned how to use the system, I couldn't resist searching. I was sympathetic. If I'd grown up believing my father had abandoned me, I'd want answers too. We invited him to our home the following weekend to meet his half-sisters. The meeting went better than expected. The girls were initially shocked but quickly became curious about their new sibling. For the next few weeks, Jason became a regular visitor. We were slowly building a relationship, navigating the awkwardness of our situation with goodwill on both sides. I even reached out to Rebecca through social media, hoping to understand why she'd kept Jason's existence from me and why she'd told him I'd abandoned them. She didn't respond. Then came the turning point. Jason asked to meet privately to discuss something important. I assumed he wanted to talk about meeting extended family, or perhaps needed advice. Instead, he slid a document across the table, a demand for $3 million in back child support, emotional damages, and compensatory support. What is this? I asked, genuinely confused by the sudden shift. 26 years of child support, plus interest, he said coolly, plus compensation for growing up without a father. My lawyer says we have a solid case given your current financial position. I'm a successful software engineer with a good income, but I'm not wealthy by any means. $3 million might as well have been $30 million, an impossible sum. Jason, this isn't reasonable, I said carefully. I never knew about you. I would have helped support you if I'd known. Prove it, he challenged. It's your word against my mother's. And speaking of family matters, I wonder how your parents would feel knowing their precious son fathered a child he never supported? Or how about your in-laws? Or the parents at your daughter's private school? And that's when everything unraveled. Jason hadn't been building a relationship. He'd been gathering intelligence. He revealed that he'd used his position at AncestryLink to access not just my DNA profile, but those of my extended family members who had also used the service. He knew about my father's non-paternity event. My dad had discovered through his own DNA test years earlier that his father wasn't his biological father. He knew about Sarah's cousin who had been adopted and reconnected with the family as an adult. I have access to all of it, he said with chilling calmness. Family secrets are valuable, aren't they? I wonder what happens when they all come out at once. I was stunned by the transformation. The earnest young man seeking connection had vanished, replaced by someone calculating and cold. This is blackmail, I said finally. He shrugged. Call it what you want. I call it compensation for a lifetime of absence. I asked for time to consider his demand, which he granted, 1 week to make arrangements. The moment I left, I called our family lawyer, who immediately advised contacting AncestryLink's legal department and the police. Things went from bad to unhinged when the company's investigation revealed Jason had done this before. He had deliberately sought employment at AncestryLink to access their database of genetic information. I wasn't his first target. He had approached 2 other biological fathers before me, successfully extracting settlements from both. One man had paid $75,000 to protect his marriage from the revelation of a child from an affair. Another had paid nearly $200,000 to avoid his religious community discovering a child born before his marriage. The company was horrified at the breach of trust and ethics. They fired Jason immediately and cooperated fully with the authorities. We filed for a restraining order, which was quickly granted given the evidence of extortion. What happened next? Nobody saw it coming. During the investigation, we discovered that Jason wasn't even Rebecca's biological son. He had been adopted as an infant, and his search for his birth parents had led him down this dark path. The DNA match with me was genuine. He was my biological child, but not with Rebecca. Further investigation revealed my college girlfriend had indeed gotten pregnant, but had placed the child for adoption without ever telling me. The child had been adopted by a couple who later divorced. The adoptive mother, facing financial difficulties, had apparently filled her son's head with stories of a wealthy biological father who had abandoned them, stoking resentment that festered into his adult years. Jason had developed this scheme as both revenge and financial solution. The criminal case against Jason resulted in probation rather than jail time, largely because I advocated for leniency. Despite his actions, I couldn't help feeling that this young man had been shaped by circumstances and lies beyond his control. The court mandated therapy as part of his sentence. The epilogue to this story still surprises me. After 6 months of counseling, Jason reached out through his therapist, asking if we might be willing to meet in a supervised setting. Against the advice of many friends, we agreed. The Jason we met that day was different, humbled, genuinely remorseful, and desperate to understand his own history. In the months since, we've built a cautious but real relationship. He's gotten to know his half-sisters and even attended their high school graduation this past spring. I won't pretend it's been easy. Trust, once broken, is difficult to rebuild, but there's something powerful about the biological connection we share, something that compels me to try. Sarah, with more generosity than I could have expected, has supported this reconciliation. Jason still faces consequences. His career in data management is essentially over, and he's working through significant legal and financial issues. But he's also found something he was searching for all along: the truth about his origins and a family willing to know him as he is, not as the villain or victim of someone else's narrative. Sometimes DNA reveals more than just ancestry. Sometimes it forces us to confront the complicated reality of family, both the families we're born into and the ones we choose to build, despite every reason not to. Family DNA surprises can be life-changing, but imagine discovering your realtor had been plotting with your ex behind your back. The divorce was as amicable as these things can be. Claire and I had been married for 12 years, built a life together, but eventually grew apart. No dramatic betrayals, no screaming matches, just the slow realization that we wanted different futures. We agreed to split everything 50-50, including our house, a beautiful craftsman we'd spent 5 years renovating in Seattle's Ravenna neighborhood. The real estate market was on fire when we decided to sell. Houses in our neighborhood were getting multiple offers within days, often well above asking price. Our place was special, original woodwork throughout, a gourmet kitchen with the high-end appliances Claire had insisted on, and a backyard landscaped to perfection. Conservative estimates put its value at around $1.2 million. A mutual friend recommended Trent Anderson, supposedly one of the top agents in the area. His website featured glowing testimonials and impressive sales statistics. When we met him, he oozed confidence and charm. "This property is exactly what buyers in this market are fighting over," he assured us, walking through our home with practiced admiration. "I can easily see this going for $1.3 million, possibly more with the right strategy." We signed with him, impressed by his marketing plan and apparent enthusiasm. The professional photos made our house look like something out of Architectural Digest. The listing went live on a Thursday, and we expected to be reviewing offers by Monday. But the expected flood of interest never materialized. A handful of people came to the first open house, but no offers followed. Trent seemed puzzled but not concerned. "Sometimes these unique properties take a little longer to find the right buyer," he explained, "someone who truly appreciates the craftsmanship." Weeks passed. The few showings we had resulted in no offers. Trent began suggesting small price reductions. "The market's shifting slightly," he claimed. "We need to stay ahead of it." I was getting anxious. Claire and I were both making payments on new apartments while still covering the mortgage on the empty house. When I expressed my concerns, Trent would sigh and point out fundamental flaws that buyers were supposedly noticing: the lack of a third bathroom, the slightly smaller primary bedroom, the northwest exposure of the backyard. "These are things we can't change," he'd say, "but we can adjust the price to compensate." What was strange was that Claire seemed less concerned than I expected. When I'd get frustrated about the lack of progress, she'd calmly suggest we trust Trent's expertise. They seemed to have developed a rapport I wasn't part of, with Claire occasionally mentioning conversations with him I hadn't been included in. "Trent thinks we should try staging the living room differently," she'd say, or "Trent mentioned the kitchen cabinets might be too specific to our taste." After 3 months and 2 price reductions, we were down to asking $1.15 million, a significant drop from our original expectations. Still, no serious offers. By month 4, with carrying cost eating into our savings, Trent presented an offer for $975,000. "It's lower than we hoped for," he acknowledged. "But it's a clean offer, no contingencies, and they're flexible on the closing date, In this cooling market, it might be the best we can do. Claire immediately supported accepting it. We're just throwing money away each month, she argued. Let's be done with this and move on with our lives. Reluctantly, I agreed. The closing was set for the end of the month. I was traveling for work and couldn't attend in person, so I signed the paperwork electronically and authorized Claire to represent our interests. I figured it was straightforward at this point. The hard decisions had already been made. The day after closing, I received my half of the proceeds, significantly less than I'd budgeted for when planning my post-divorce life. I was disappointed but resigned. At least it was over. Then I got a call from our neighbor, Margaret, who had become a friend over the years. I thought you should know, she said hesitantly. I just met your house's new owner moving in. It's your realtor. He's with Claire. I thought I'd misheard. What do you mean with Claire? They're together, Margaret clarified. Like, together. They weren't hiding it. They were actually celebrating with champagne on their front porch. I drove to the house immediately, still not believing what Margaret had told me. Sure enough, there was Trent's Range Rover in the driveway next to Claire's Audi. Through the front window, I could see them in their kitchen, laughing as they unpacked boxes. The betrayal hit me like a physical blow. Not just that Claire had apparently moved on with our realtor, that was painful but not criminal, but the dawning realization that the entire sales process had likely been manipulated. I hired a lawyer the next day. The investigation that followed revealed the full extent of the deception. Trent had been dating Claire for at least 2 months before the house was sold. Text messages recovered during discovery showed they had planned the whole thing. Trent deliberately tanking the sale by discouraging potential buyers during showings, while Claire fed him information about our financial situation and how low I might be willing to go. I told the couple today about the foundation issues, read one message from Trent to Claire. They left immediately. Another one scared off. He's getting desperate, Claire had written back. He mentioned last night he'd consider anything over $950K at this point, just to be done with it. The property had been purchased by an LLC called New Beginnings Holdings, with Trent as the registered agent. He had effectively negotiated with himself, using inside information while pretending to represent our interests. Then came the breaking point. The investigation uncovered that Trent had actually received multiple serious offers, including one for $1.28 million that he never presented to us. In real estate, this isn't just unethical, it's illegal. Agents are legally obligated to present all offers to their clients. My lawyer filed complaints with the State Real Estate Commission and a lawsuit against both Trent and Claire for fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, and conspiracy. Claire's defense essentially amounted to, I fell in love and made bad decisions, while Trent tried to claim the other offers had been tentative inquiries rather than formal offers, a distinction demolished by the paper trail. The Real Estate Commission moved quickly, suspending Trent's license pending a full investigation. His broker, horrified by the scandal, terminated his employment immediately. The lawsuit proceeded more slowly, but the evidence was overwhelming. What happened next? Nobody saw it coming. Several potential buyers who had been interested in our home but discouraged by Trent came forward with their stories. One couple recorded Trent telling them the house had serious electrical issues that the sellers are trying to hide. Another had emails where they'd expressed interest at our original asking price, only to be told by Trent that we had already accepted another offer. The lawsuit never made it to trial. Trent's attorney, seeing the mounting evidence, advised him to settle. The final agreement required Trent and Claire to pay us $1.45 million, more than our original asking price, plus legal fees. Trent's real estate license was permanently revoked, and his reputation in the industry was destroyed. Claire and Trent kept the house, having paid a premium for it in the end, but the victory felt hollow in many ways. Money couldn't fully compensate for the betrayal by someone I had shared a life with for over a decade. The most unexpected consequence has been the community response. Our former neighbors, many of whom had become friends, completely ostracized Claire and Trent. Margaret organized a neighborhood association meeting where she shared what had happened, leading to a unanimous decision to exclude them from community events. The holiday progressive dinner skipped their house. Invitations to block parties never made it to their mailbox. When they walked their dog, people crossed the street to avoid speaking with them. I've since bought a condo downtown and started rebuilding my life. The additional money from the settlement helped me launch a small business I've been dreaming about for years. Claire occasionally reaches out, usually after a glass of wine or two, with texts that alternate between justifying her actions and expressing regret. Trent, I've heard, has moved into commercial real estate in a different state where his reputation hasn't preceded him. But in an industry built on relationships and referrals, starting over at his age won't be easy. Sometimes I drive by the old house, not out of nostalgia or bitterness, but as a reminder that the life I thought I was building there wasn't the one I was meant to have. The house that was once my dream home now represents a painful chapter closed, and I'm surprisingly okay with that. Speaking of professional betrayals, wait until you hear how one ghostwriter seized an opportunity while her client was fighting for his life. I'd spent my entire career saving lives as a neurosurgeon, pioneering techniques that revolutionized brain surgery. By 55, I had performed over 8,000 surgeries, published in every major medical journal, and been featured on the cover of Time magazine as one of the healers of the century. But despite my professional success, I'd neglected to document my journey. My children kept insisting I share my story, not just the medical breakthroughs, but the human side of medicine that had shaped me. Dad, people need to hear about the homeless man whose brain tumor you removed pro bono, who later became your hospital's head of maintenance, my daughter would say, or how you developed that surgical technique after dreaming about your grandmother's embroidery patterns. I finally relented, but between my surgical schedule and teaching responsibilities, I knew I couldn't write it myself. That's when I hired Vanessa Reed, a ghostwriter highly recommended by several colleagues who'd published memoirs. She had impressive credentials, degrees in journalism and creative writing, bylines in prestigious publications, and a reputation for capturing her subjects' authentic voices. Our collaboration began in January. For 6 months, we met 3 times weekly, often in my home office where I felt comfortable sharing the most personal aspects of my life and career. I told her everything, from my childhood in rural Appalachia, where I performed my first surgery on a wounded bird, to the night I lost a child patient and nearly abandoned medicine entirely, to the experimental procedures I developed that are now standard in neurosurgery. Vanessa recorded our sessions, took meticulous notes, and gradually shaped my ramblings into a coherent narrative. By July, we had a complete manuscript that exceeded my expectations. It captured not just my professional achievements, but the philosophical journey of a doctor confronting mortality daily while trying to maintain humanity. We titled it Between Heartbeats, A Surgeon's Journey Through the Brain and Beyond. The publisher scheduled a release for the following spring. Life has a way of derailing even the most carefully laid plans. In August, just weeks after completing the manuscript, I was driving home from the hospital when a drunk driver crossed the median and hit my car head-on. The irony wasn't lost on my colleagues. The surgeon who had saved countless lives from traumatic brain injuries was now fighting for his own with the same condition. I have no memory of the 9 months that followed. I'm told I was in a medically induced coma for the first 3 months while they managed the swelling in my brain. After that, I remained in a minimally conscious state, occasionally showing signs of awareness but unable to communicate or fully wake. My prognosis was grim. Several neurologists suggested to my family that my condition was likely permanent, that the man I had been was essentially gone. Throughout this time, Vanessa remained in contact with my family, expressing concern and asking for updates. In hindsight, her motives were far from altruistic. 6 months after my accident, while I lay unresponsive in a long-term care facility, Between Heartbeats appeared in bookstores nationwide. The author? Vanessa Reed. She hadn't simply published our manuscript, she had rewritten it in first person as her own memoir, changing only the most verifiable details. The childhood in Appalachia became a childhood in the Ozarks. The medical school at Johns Hopkins became Harvard. But the emotional core of the book, my personal reflections, ethical dilemmas, heartbreaks and triumphs, remained intact, now presented as her experiences. The book became an instant bestseller. Vanessa was featured on major talk shows, gave inspirational speeches about her medical career, and was celebrated as a pioneer for women in neurosurgery. She crafted an elaborate backstory explaining why no one in the medical community knew her, claiming she had practiced primarily in underserved international locations and recently returned to the States. My daughter, Emma, was the one who discovered the theft. A colleague gave her the book, saying, "This reminded me so much of your father." Emma began reading it one night and was stunned to find passages that recounted stories she'd heard directly from me, personal anecdotes, family moments, even the exact wording of lessons I'd taught her about life and medicine. "This wasn't just inspiration or coincidence," Emma later told me. She described the night we snuck into the hospital garden during your overnight shift when I was 7 and you showed me the stars through your portable telescope. She even included your quote about how the universe inside the human brain has as many mysteries as the one above us. "Word for word, Dad. Word for word." Emma contacted the publisher immediately, explaining that Vanessa had stolen her comatose father's life story. The publisher was skeptical. After all, Vanessa had drafts, notes, and what appeared to be original material. Emma had no manuscript, no evidence beyond her word that these were her father's experiences. It became a case of he said, she said, except I couldn't speak for myself. Then came the breaking point. 9 months after my accident, against all medical expectations, I began to emerge from my minimally conscious state. The recovery was slow and grueling, but my mind gradually returned, along with my memories and sense of self. When Emma finally told me about Vanessa's betrayal, I was still relearning how to use a spoon. "She stole everything, Dad," Emma said, tears streaming down her face. "And there's a movie deal now. They want to make a film about her life, your life." The legal battle that followed was complicated by Vanessa's careful maneuvering. She claimed that our sessions had been consultations, not ghostwriting, that I had merely shared experiences that inspired her own memoir. She produced contracts that appeared to give her rights to material from our discussions, though my attorneys later proved these had been altered. The turning point came when our legal team subpoenaed her computer files. Forensic digital analysts uncovered the original manuscript, the one we had completed together, with my name on it. They found tracked changes showing how she had systematically replaced my name with hers throughout the document, along with emails to her agent discussing how my medical condition created the perfect opportunity, since I would likely never recover to challenge her. "He's essentially gone," she had written 3 months after my accident. "His family is focused on their grief, not some unpublished manuscript. This story is too important to remain untold, and I've lived with it long enough that it feels like my own now." The publisher immediately recalled all copies of the book and cancelled the movie option. Vanessa was dropped by her agency and became a pariah in publishing circles. We won a substantial financial settlement, though money was never the point. But the damage to my privacy was irreparable. The most intimate details of my life, failures, fears, relationships, private moments of doubt and triumph, had been consumed by the public as entertainment. Strangers approached me during my recovery, referencing deeply personal experiences they had no right to know. Former patients contacted me about confidential details of their cases that had been included in the book, thinly disguised but recognizable to those involved. The legal victory felt hollow. I had spent my career healing others, only to have my own healing journey exploited during my most vulnerable moment. The ultimate irony is that I eventually published the real autobiography, but it never achieved the success of Vanessa's fraudulent version. Critics called it derivative and lacking the emotional resonance of Reed's original work, not understanding that she had stolen that resonance from me. Today, 5 years later, I've retired from surgery. My recovery was substantial but not complete. Fine motor skills essential for neurosurgery remain beyond my capabilities. Instead, I teach and mentor young surgeons, sharing the wisdom gained from both sides of the scalpel. I'm more guarded now, more careful about what I share and with whom. The experience taught me that vulnerability, while essential to human connection, can be weaponized by those without conscience. Vanessa, I've heard, moved abroad and eventually published another book under a pseudonym. I don't read reviews or look for her name. Some betrayals run too deep to revisit. Literary theft is brutal, but imagine discovering your surgeon had ulterior motives while holding your life in their hands. I never saw it coming. That's the part that still haunts me, how completely oblivious I was to the elaborate deception unfolding around me. But I guess that's what happens when you're busy trying not to die. The accident happened on a rainy Tuesday morning. I was driving to work like any normal day when my brakes failed on the highway. I remember the moment of panic when my foot went straight to the floor, the car picking up speed down the hill, and then nothing. I woke up 3 days later in the ICU with my wife Karen, clutching my hand and a tall man in a white coat standing at the foot of my bed. "Mr. Crawford, I'm Dr. Ellis. I performed your emergency surgery," he said with quiet confidence. "You suffered multiple internal injuries, but the most concerning was a ruptured spleen and a tear in your aorta. We almost lost you twice on the table, but you're stable now." Karen looked at him like he was some kind of god. "Dr. Ellis worked for 16 hours straight," she told me, her eyes never leaving his face. "The other surgeons wanted to give up, but he refused to let you go." In the hazy days that followed, I learned more about my condition and the miracle Dr. Ellis had performed. Apparently, my case was so unusual that he'd already submitted a paper to a medical journal about the innovative technique he'd used to repair my aorta. I was a medical marvel, they said. Lucky to be alive. My recovery would be long and complex, 6 months minimum before I could return to work, with multiple follow-up surgeries planned. I was just grateful to be breathing. Dr. Ellis became a fixture in our lives. Unlike most surgeons who hand off post-operative care to others, he personally oversaw every aspect of my treatment. He called daily to check on me and made house calls several times a week after I was discharged. Something Karen repeatedly told me was unheard of for a surgeon of his caliber. "He must really care about your case," she would say, always making sure the house was spotless and she looked her best before his visits. I was touched by his dedication. Here was this brilliant, busy surgeon taking a special interest in my recovery. During his visits, he would examine me thoroughly, adjust my medications, and then often stay for dinner or drinks, engaging Karen and me in conversations about everything from philosophy to travel. I noticed Karen hanging on his every word, but I wasn't concerned. After all, he had saved my life. Her admiration seemed natural, even appropriate. When she started dressing more carefully on days he was scheduled to visit, or mentioned casual conversations she'd had with him when I was resting, I thought nothing of it. 3 months into my recovery, something odd happened. I was having one of my better days and decided to check my email, something I hadn't done much since the accident. Among the backlog was an anonymous message with no subject line. I almost deleted it as spam, but curiosity made me open it. The message contained only 2 sentences. "Ask your wife where she was last Thursday afternoon when you were at physical therapy. Ask your miracle doctor about the Grand Hyatt Hotel." Attached were 2 photos, one of Karen entering what looked like a hotel lobby and another of Dr. Ellis following shortly after. The timestamps showed they were taken the previous week. I stared at the images, trying to make sense of them. Karen had told me she was having lunch with her sister that day. My first instinct was to dismiss it. Maybe they'd met Dr. Ellis for some reason, or maybe it wasn't even them. The photos were slightly grainy, taken from a distance. I deleted the email, ashamed for even entertaining suspicions about the 2 people who had been my lifelines through this ordeal. But then the emails continued. Each one contained more photos, more specific details. Karen and Dr. Ellis at a restaurant 2 months before my accident. The 2 of them walking in a park, holding hands, entering an apartment building together. And that's when everything unraveled. The most damning email included screenshots of text messages between them, dating back 8 months, long before my accident. The messages were explicit, discussing their relationship and their frustration at having to hide it. One exchange made my blood run cold. Karen: "I wish we could see each other without all the sneaking around." Ellis: "After the procedure, we'll have the perfect excuse. I'll need to monitor him closely, make house calls. No one will question us spending time together." Karen: "Are you sure it won't be too dangerous?" Ellis: "The brake line will be damaged enough to fail, but not catastrophically. He'll most likely crash at low speed. Injuries serious enough to need surgery, but survivable. I'll make sure I'm on call that day. Trust me." I confronted Karen that evening, showing her the emails and messages. I expected denial, outrage at being falsely accused. Instead, she crumbled immediately, confirming my worst fears. "We didn't want to kill you," she sobbed, as if this was supposed to comfort me. "James just needed a reason to be in our lives, to be able to see me without suspicion. The accident was supposed to be minor, just enough to bring you to his hospital." The calculated cruelty of it was staggering. They had deliberately tampered with my car, causing an accident that nearly killed me, all to create a cover for their affair. Dr. Ellis had used his position as my surgeon to embed himself in our lives, all while sleeping with my wife. But that wasn't even the worst part. As I hired an attorney and began investigating further, we discovered that Dr. Ellis had been deliberately extending my recovery period. The persistent complications I'd been experiencing weren't normal. They were the result of medications he had prescribed that were known to cause the exact symptoms I was struggling with. He had been keeping me weak and dependent to maintain his access to my home and my wife. I filed complaints with the hospital and the state medical board, providing all the evidence I had gathered. The police became involved when the tampering with my vehicle was revealed. Karen, facing potential criminal charges, provided a full confession detailing how Dr. Ellis had instructed her to damage the brake line just enough to cause a controlled accident. The Medical Ethics Board investigation was thorough and damning. They found evidence that Dr. Ellis had engaged in similar behavior with at least 2 other patients' spouses, though mine was the first case involving deliberate harm. His medical license was permanently revoked. He eventually pled guilty to criminal charges of reckless endangerment and professional misconduct to avoid attempted murder charges, resulting in a 7-year prison sentence. My divorce from Karen was finalized in record time. She avoided jail by cooperating with prosecutors, but lost everything in our settlement due to the extraordinary circumstances. Last I heard, she had moved across the country and changed her name. The physical recovery from my injuries took another year, longer than it should have because of the unnecessary medications and treatments Dr. Ellis had subjected me to. The emotional recovery is ongoing. How do you get past the knowledge that the person who shared your bed orchestrated your near-death experience? How do you trust again after discovering that the hands you believed were healing you were actually causing you harm? I'm working with a therapist now, trying to rebuild my capacity for trust. I've moved to a new city, started a new job. I check my car thoroughly before driving it anywhere. I've declined to date anyone in the medical field, which my therapist says is understandable, but something we need to work on. The anonymous emails, by the way, came from a nurse at the hospital who had observed Dr. Ellis's unusually attentive behavior toward my wife during my surgery. She became suspicious when she overheard them discussing their dinner plans while I was still unconscious in recovery. Her conscience wouldn't let her stay silent, but fear for her job made her remain anonymous. After everything came to light, she reached out directly. I owe her my freedom, if not my life. Sometimes I think about Dr. Ellis in prison, wondering if he reflects on the damage he caused, not just to me, but to the oath he took to, first, do no harm. I wonder if he thinks the affair was worth losing his career, his freedom, and his reputation. I wonder if Karen ever visits him, or if their love crumbled under the weight of their crimes. Mostly, though, I try to look forward. The scars from my surgeries have faded to thin white lines. The other scars, the invisible ones, are slower to heal but fading nonetheless. And I've learned that sometimes the most dangerous people are the ones you're taught to trust implicitly, the ones who hold your life in their hands while smiling to your face. Sweet dreams, everyone, and remember that while these stories might seem unbelievable, truth is often stranger than fiction. The people we trust with our health, homes, and hearts hold tremendous power, power that can heal or harm. If you enjoyed these tales of betrayal and justice, subscribe for next week's collection, where I'll share stories about inheritances that tore families apart in ways you'd never expect. Until next time, lock your doors, check your security cameras, and maybe think twice about who you're sharing your deepest secrets with. The support group we formed still meets monthly. Our children, all half-siblings in a biological sense, have formed their own connections, supportive relationships that somehow feel like a small victory amid all the trauma. Together, we're redefining what family means, refusing to let one man's horrific actions determine our children's stories. If that doctor's betrayal made your skin crawl, wait until you hear about a paralegal who turned evidence into a weapon against her own client.